Good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Clipless Radio, or I suppose good afternoon. So, as you've obviously seen by the title, today we will be interviewing Mr. Mark McCormack, leader of the New World Spirit Movement. That is going to begin in a moment, but I figured I'd do just a little introduction first before we bring him on. I did set up all my audio and everything yesterday and tested it out, so it should be working perfectly, but in the event there are any issues, please do let me know in the comments, and I will fix that as soon as I possibly can. So thank you very, very much. Make sure. Well, I'll just have to make sure he's available first, obviously. Okay, well, we'll be waiting for him. It seems he has not accepted my friend request on the friend request on Discord as of yet, so I can't quite see if he is ready, but I got a few minutes for an introduction. That's very good. Before we begin, as always, I'd like to... There he is. He is ready. Just making sure... Okay, perfect. Everything is set up. Looks like we are good to go. Okay, well, I'm very excited for today, as should you be. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. Thanks for tuning into Clipless Radio. My name is Rylan, and you are, as just stated, listening to Clipless Radio. Today we have an interview with Mark McCormack, and before I get into my main intro stuff, I'm going to wait for the music to end. It's very good. It's provided by our channel member, Ronnie Limestone. It is our intro music here on Festina Lente. We can maybe fade that out a little bit. I don't have a fade out button, but I do have volume control. So anyway, thank you for tuning in to Clipless Radio. My name is Rylan. Welcome to Festina Lente. It is our weekly show where we interview writers, interesting people, or we just generally talk about things. All began from the Sober 2025 broadcast, which is essentially now over because, well, it was too easy. So, not too many updates, but that's a good thing. Now, before we begin, I'd like to thank our channel members, Joshua Nolik, Torritz, Catherine McMillan, Dink Smallwood, and our Ronnie Limestone, who provided the music that you were just listening to, and our newest member, Dapper Clown. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find information linked in the description below. Costs you $5 a month, and if I have enough channel members, all of the ads will come off the channel. So you are supporting an ad-free experience for everyone should you sign up. I believe the threshold is something like 15 members. I don't know exactly. I'd have to look at the things again. But yes, if you're not familiar with myself, this is Clipless Radio. We do this weekly live stream. I do audiobooks predominantly. If you are a follower of Mark McCormack and that's why you're tuning in, that's who I am. And I am from, as you can see here on the screen, right there, Edmonton, Alberta, so hence how I know Mark. So my background with Mark is I was a philosophy student at the University of Alberta. I met him through there, where he was doing his hunger strikes for the New World Spirit Movement, which, trust me, we are going to get into today. Don't you worry. He's got his big ultimate grade 11 hunger strike coming up, which is going to be his biggest one yet for the purpose of spreading the word about the New World Spirit Movement and universal logic. So we first met in a Philosophy 400 class talking about metaphysics. I think it was mostly... He approached me after a... so I had seen him do his hunger strikes on campus prior to this, and he was a little bit of a folk hero in some of the university circles. And he approached me after I gave a presentation about Aristotle, and we started talking. Turns out we took the same bus. We lived not too far from each other. We started interacting that way. I lent him some books, And now, I mean, he's preparing for the sort of his Calvary, his the ultimate moment of his movement. And we're going to talk about that today. Don't you worry. Today is going to be a long one, so buckle in. I don't know if... So normally Festina Lente is about an hour long. I haven't told Mark this yet, but I have budgeted about 3 hours for this one. I don't know if we're going to use them all, but we might. I will get into Mark and where you can find more of his longer 10-hour videos online. Also, apologies if you hear any weird sounds or the camera moves suddenly. There is a dog around my feet. Atlas, the newest member of the Kallipolis Radio staff. So he is moving around beneath me and might bump into the camera tripod a bit, but hopefully not. Will you, buddy? No, don't think you will. So without further ado, let's get Mark on here and let's begin this interview. So buckle up, everyone. And here we go. I guess I could have added them to the call beforehand and then done it that way to make sure there weren't any errors, but that would require prep work that I don't typically do. So we'll give him a second. Last time I went over to his house, he did have like 7 laptops on the kitchen table, so who knows which one he is using or trying to figure out, but he's a fairly tech-savvy man, and well, he did not answer my call, so... Okay. Ready. All right, well, plans for the channel, I suppose. Oh, there he is. Okay, never mind. We got him back. See, this is why you do prep work. Oh, Mark, hello.
Hello.
Hi,
how you doing?
Good, how are you? Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you, but I can't see you.
No, that's fine. My camera is on the live stream itself. I don't want to take too much of my latency with this one. I only have a face cam on myself, so if you wanted to turn yours off, you can, but I don't have the software to patch 2 video feeds into my thing at once.
Okay, so it's just my voice?
Yes, it is just your voice.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, and I have had some issues with the Wi-Fi, so like the less of it that is used by my computer, probably the better quality the stream will be. So,
so turn my video off, is what you're saying?
If you turn your video off, yeah, it'll probably just make things work a little better.
Okay, let's do it.
Perfect. All right, amazing. Well, how are you doing on this fine Thursday afternoon?
Well, living the dream, living the mega crisis dream right now, or nightmare, depending how you look at it. But exactly. So far today is hopeful. Perfect. How about you?
Well, don't jump ahead too far. So I don't know if I mentioned this. So typically the episodes are about an hour long. I have budgeted for this one about 3 hours because I know you do like to talk. That's for sure. But the structure that I've kind of got for this, and I guess I could have sent you this beforehand, but what I was thinking is first hour, I would say, is going to be mostly focused on you yourself, if you want to give your background, again, as much as you'd like to share. Second one is going to be sort of the New World Spirit, your movement, the universal logic, all of that sort of stuff. And the third, the final hour, if we use up an hour for each of these, will be sort of about how people can interact with you, how they can find your content, where you are, how they can support you, things like that. And then in between these hours, there'll be little 5-minute breaks just for whatever you need.
Okay, I feel blessed and privileged. 3 whole hours.
Yeah.
I'll do my best. You're right, there's a lot to say.
Yeah, we don't need to use all 3, but I mean, if you wanted to steal some time from one of the hours for one of the other ones, feel free. But yeah, so I'd like to begin. I gave a brief introduction on at least how we met and how we know each other, and not really too much of what you do and what you stand for, but if you'd like to give people just a little introduction to yourself. I mean, your name is in the title of the stream, so that is already covered. They do know you are Mark McCormack, but if you'd like to give a little background on yourself, please let the people know who you are.
Okay. I'm very... I would say normal in one sense and unusual in another sense, and it's because I've had a juxtaposed, very contradictory human experience so far, I guess you could say, in that being a white male in North America, one of the most privileged countries in the world, Canada, um, I experienced a lot of marginalization and was born on the poverty line in Canada uh, to a teenage mother, an alcoholic father, a whole bunch of challenges that, despite my privileges that I just mentioned, that should endow me with power and some kind of voice, I didn't have it. So there's this strange experience that I had of two different worlds happening simultaneously. And I didn't know it when I was young, but it was opening my consciousness to a perspective that I would later find out not very many people seem to have on the planet right now, unless they've suffered in some tremendous way. Suffering is a form of negation that performs a scientific but also a spiritual function in terms of consciousness raising. And if you can endure it, it deepens your experience of the moment. So when I was growing up, I had a lot of that. And normally when you're raised in such challenging experiences for so long, it hardens your heart. So, a lot of people give into that, end up in, crime, end up in a lot of bitterness. And I did get there as a kid. By the time I was 12 years old, I realized I was poor because I was more aware than maybe other people. And it really harmed me to be knowledgeable of what my place on earth really was and how crushing and how inescapable it felt. But my mother was incredibly loving because she had experienced something similar and had an awakening herself, and she gave that to her kids, and I was lucky to have that. That's what prevented me from spiraling downwards and led to all of this big journey that I've been on in terms of trying to change the entire world, when most people think that's impossible or have been indoctrinated into a state of mind where they think it's impossible for them. So that's a little bit of where I got started. I don't know how much you want me to drill into my entire story. We have an hour, so
we got a while. I was going to say, because you worked in the oil field for a bit as well, did you not?
Yeah, so I became an environmentalist when I had this kind of spiritual awakening, and I tried to go vegetarian for a bit, but my family was in trucking. That's how my mother sort of raised 5 kids when she was going through 2 divorces and 3 marriages and a lot of instability. And when you're born into something like that, it's hard to escape it, because the only way that you have an advantage, or even a competitive advantage compared to the rest of society, is you play on the skills that your parents have. So I ended up going to university, but then my father's business was about to go under, and he begged me to come and work for him. And I said, no, I don't. I think we need to save the environment. I think the oil patch is killing things. And we saw our whole area, like where I live, was around a bunch of farmers here in Alberta. And so we saw these black tanks like pop up everywhere in 10, 15 years. And we didn't realize that at the time, but they were rooting the water table around us. And there was leaks all over the place. Now you're not allowed to go in the water in some of the lakes around here. So I was aware of this by the time I went to university. And I'm a very family-oriented person. So when he really was up against the wall, I made a deal with him. I said, okay, I'll work for you for 1 month, and you better hire people to replace me, because I'm going back to my activism. And in 1 month, my dad is so loving. Like, I really respect my dad a lot. He got over his alcoholism, hasn't touched a drop in 36 years, I think. Really proud of him. And he always instilled in me this idea that I could become something greater. Greater than just little Bonnyville. Even though I'm proud of coming from Bonnyville, my roots, the world needs something more. And yes, I went there. He taught me everything I needed to know in 1 month. So it was kind of nepotistic, but he literally taught me from zero, didn't know much about the field work, to running the machinery, being paid not top wage, but like most people who worked in the past 4 to 10 years end up getting paid what I was paid. And we worked every single day, something like 12 to 25 hours a day. I don't know if I should say much more, because some of it was a little bit pushing the edge of the legal boundaries. So
I'm curious to know how you work 25 hours a day.
Well, what should I say here? There's ways in the past, right? They put a lot of pressure on the workers because you're marginalized. Like they have billions and billions of dollars ripping through these companies, and they just say go 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 go, and they turn a blind eye, and then they threaten your job, and they threaten a whole bunch of things to force you to work these crazy hours. And I was I was disappointed in how much student debt I had racked up after about 3 years of university or 4 years, and I made $10,000 payments at a time each month. I think I paid off my student loans within 8 months, and I donated 25,000 to the activism that I was doing to save the environment. Ironically, but we worked. I would give more details, but I don't know if I want to set an example. Anyway, I worked 8 months straight.
Again, it's like as much as you feel comfortable sharing, you don't have to tell everyone everything. But
yeah, well, I feel like they should know because we are in a bad situation, and it kind of gives a picture of how hard we need to work to sort of undo a lot of the damage that's been done. So this oil patch experience, yeah, I worked 8 months every single day except for 2 days. And it was something like 12 to plus 20 hours, and there's ways to do things to make it all kosher, but in reality that's what happened, and that's why I was able to make so much money, get myself out of debt, and be able to take on the activism full time while going to school and not being in debt or subservient to the debt economy that we all are aware of is enslaving us and causing anxiety and depression, and it like takes 10 years off of your life. Like they've done studies on this, right? It's causing a lot of problems, and the debt ceilings in the United States and Canada and all these developed countries is on the verge of insanity. We're paying so much on these interest payments. So that's how I got myself out of the system. Is family love. I ended up staying longer than the 1 month because we couldn't find somebody to replace us who wanted to work as hard, and then the money really started to be worth. Like I could do more positive with it than leaving that money with people who are doing a lot of drugs in the patch. There's a lot of gang activity and a lot of people who are marginalized in society. They're the ones that are being suppressed and abused in the oil patch. At least it was back then. So I got a really good experience of what the blue collar workers were experiencing, why they were so angry. And there's a lot of reason to be angry on that level. So I got this white collar and blue collar kind of experience, and then got myself out of debt and started rocking the full-time activism with funds to make some waves.
Well, I know you, and I'm going to mention this so I don't forget, although I did write it down. I know you did some union organizing at one point. I think you were trying to unionize Uber drivers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I came quite a bit later.
Right. Well, the one point I did want to rewind back to was the like the sort of nature and cause and experience of your spiritual awakening that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because it was in BC, if I'm not mistaken. Am I remembering that correctly?
No, it was in a repo lot here in Alberta.
Okay.
My mother was struggling to raise us kids as in these trailer parks, and if you know anything about white people in trailer parks, you're considered trailer trash. But in my little town, my mother wanted us to escape it because there's a lot of abuse that goes on in those trailer parks, at least back then. And there was, it's a miracle I got out of there without being abused. One of my siblings wasn't so lucky, unfortunately. We found out years later. But children, like there's a song by Pat Benatar that my mom used to listen to all the time, and it was called "Hell Is for Children," and it's true. You're stuck there, and my spiritual awakening didn't happen in the trailer park, but there was a sign that I was different from a lot of children early on, that I was aware of a lot of things, and she ended up moving us away from there because it started to get really dramatic, and there's a lot of prejudice against my family from my grandmother, who had a mental illness, and she was sort of, this is when psychiatry was starting to put these drugs on the market, and they were kind of unstable and had all these effects, and so, you grow up loving your grandmother, not knowing that she has this pretty serious condition, and then these drugs sort of made it worse in a lot of ways. So she tried to be a functioning member of our little small town, but they started making fun of her, and the mental health stigma was really shocking. my mother and my grandmother tried to protect us kids from that growing up, but we didn't know that our whole lives were basically marginalized. And when we grew up, we realized how extreme it was and how hard my mother had to work to get out from underneath that. So getting out of Bonnyville, getting out of the trailer park was the first step for her. And we moved out to an acreage where she could kind of control the influences that were around us. Because all we had were these like semi-wealthy farmers who didn't want to steal, who didn't want to do anything. And it was really sort of beautiful, really isolating at first, but it taught me to meditate and be okay with silence and to be okay with going into the inner world. There wasn't all these fancy, 7-Elevens and all these sensuous things that could distract. So it really was formative. And the water supply also didn't have all these chemicals in it. We had like well water, which later on might have been contaminated by all this oil patch work. But the tests, we tested the water every year, and it turned out we were getting some pretty healthy, a much healthier upbringing than maybe other children were getting. And we were separated from junk food because we couldn't afford it. My mother couldn't afford it at that time. So anyway, this led to a clean sort of slate that we could be raised up from. And we were in this small rural school where some of the parents knew about us, but a lot of them weren't aware of the family history. And we were known as good people, just like a little bit, out there, or at least my grandparents. And so anyway, experienced some bullying first, when we first got there, and that made me spiral downwards. And by the time I was 12, like I said, I became aware of like, okay, not even these farmer kids are treating me in a normal way. And my mother was very powerful. When I was being bullied, she went in there ripping and tearing, and she made a big fuss about it. And I think that's what caused me to have some space to have this breathing room, to have this spiritual awakening. And it happened when she kind of kept us separated from religion, but in the beginning she turned to Christianity to try and provide some kind of stability in all the chaos that was happening to her and us, and the divorces, and the police were involved, and it was crazy. But she ended up meeting a social worker in this Al-Anon program where families who have alcoholic spouses go to get support for the whole family. And so she ended up meeting this amazing and spiritual woman there, very new agey, but women in those communities are fiery, like they are not push arounds. And my mother is one of those, like, back in the 80s, she was one of those chicks that would wear leather jackets and tassels and like go around and really push her weight around. So anyway, she met another woman like that, and when I was spiraling downwards, she knew of a book called The Celestine Prophecy. And The Celestine Prophecy is a very low-level book. In the 1990s, it was very big, but it was something anybody could read, especially a child. But it was written by this psychologist who had been practicing psychology for like 30 years. And there was a lot of real science in it, a lot of real psychology, a lot of experience in the spiritual side of the journey. And so it captivated me. So my mother gave me the book, and I was so angry. I hated reading. I hated myself. I hated school. I hated my parents. I hated my religion. I was cynical. I remember having this image of being a mouse in a maze with no cheese at the end. And it was really the lack of the cheese. I thought if there was at least cheese at the end of this journey, it'd be worth it. But it felt like there wasn't even any cheese. So I was really spiraling downwards and wondering why this world was so messed up compared to what I felt in the inner world. I knew things could be better. They didn't have to be this way. And so this book came upon me, and I didn't read it. I was like, no, I'm not going to read this. So my mother sat down trying to raise 5 kids in all this turmoil that I later learned she was going through. And she read the whole book to the family and sat us down in this repo lot living room that we had to fix, and the foundation was cracking, and there was so much crack grass that we couldn't even mow it. Like we had to rip it out with tractors and a whole bunch of things. And we later found out that the people who owned it before us might have intentionally destroyed the inner part of the house to get some kind of extra compensation or something. So it was extra destroyed when we got there. So we spent all of our initial summers fixing this repossession lot. So anyway, she sat us down in this living room, and she read one chapter. The very first chapter was called Critical Mass. And by the end of that chapter, it was like a couple of pages, my little mind was completely transformed. Like whatever James Redfield, the author, the psychologist of this book, put into those words, it was what I needed. It was what my soul craved. That inner purity that I had as a kid, it connected to that and it liberated me and it gave me a path out of the crushing depression and cynicism that I was feeling, and it allowed me to use my sensitivity to not hone in on the negative, but hone in on the hidden positive, the synchronicities, the opportunities that are there if you try and align with a deeper kind of meaning. It doesn't mean suffering goes away, it just transforms the meaning of the suffering. And so that was probably the most transformative thing other than my mother's love. That was the next thing that allowed me to have the growing journey, the process to get to where I am today, and then to get to the unionizing after that. So no psychedelics, too young for that, didn't have any of the normal ayahuasca. The ayahuasca came later. There was another awakening that happened there. Sure. But this was just poverty, crushing a small, sensitive kid with a mother's love.
So there were two spiritual awakenings then.
Yeah, the second one is probably more like the traditional, there's a big journey there, a big story, and it was more, in one sense, it was more extreme because the psychedelic, like I wasn't big on drugs or anything. Like I was raised very pure. My mother kept us away from all that kind of stuff. So I really got to hone in on my intuition and like use my natural brain chemistry. And there's endogenous DMT in the brain, right? And DMT is the key drug, the key chemical in the plant ayahuasca that Peruvian shamans used to have transcendental experiences. And if anybody knows about it, it's considered the most spiritual drug on earth. So that's why I thought, okay, I'm going to run a spiritual experiment to see what life is like on the most spiritual drug. I only took natural drugs. I wouldn't let myself take ecstasy or crystal meth or anything that had long-term nervous system effects. So I would do weed. I think I did a couple of times, mushrooms a couple of times, and then I did ayahuasca 3 times.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've never heard of a spiritual awakening on meth. That's for sure.
Yeah, it'll alter your state of mind, but there's a certain kind of alteration that gets you in alignment with the truth. And the other one is more like escapism and sort of entertainment and quelling trauma. So I made sure that I wasn't on this journey for escapism. If you're on escapism, then the external stimulus can cause an addiction, and then you start to spiral down rather than have it show you yourself from a new perspective so you can grow when you come back to normal reality. And so that was the promise I made to myself, was to do this for the right reason. And I was around an amazing group of people at the time. I think I had 8 spiritual people around me, spiritually scientific people. They're very grounded. And my first trip was really positive. I was in love too, so I had all this an amazing trip, and it was just like mind-blowing. But then the ayahuasca experience, that was mushrooms my first time. And the thing is I never hallucinate on any sort of psychedelic. That's something that I noticed, is with my gut chemistry or my brain chemistry, I just never hallucinate, even on big doses. The physical world stays the same for me, but the meaning, the time, the closeness, space, all the inner universals change a lot for me. So it showed me that my consciousness is grounded in something a little bit different than other people. It's rooted in something more substantial, where I'm not distracted by the external appearances of things. So when I did ayahuasca, one of the first things that happens to you is you puke a lot, right? It's a very strong purging experience. You heal. If you have trauma, you do ayahuasca. It shows you yourself from a much higher perspective of yourself, so that you realize the trauma that you went through is only a small part of you that defines you rather than destroys you. And it changes the meaning, like I said, so that it becomes a sort of beautiful part of the tapestry, sort of like I think it's called kinsinku, where you have that Japanese teacup that has that golden crack in it. Yeah, exactly. So the ayahuasca experience didn't make me purge. I never puked on any of the 3 journeys. And so that was another sign that something was very unusual about what kind of body and mind that I had. And I didn't have a lot of like psychedelic experience either, so it was sort of like fresh off the boat sort of experience. And when I asked my friend, I went with my friends, that your friends really changed the vibe of the space.
Mm.
So my friends were there, and I asked them after it, and I said, "What happened? Like, didn't you guys see what was happening in the room with us?" And they said, "No, I was like in godhood. Like, I was flying all over the world. Like, I was doing a whole bunch of things." And that was another sign that okay, I'm I'm experiencing this different than most people, where I'm staying very grounded on Earth, while also experiencing the vastness of the universe as a part of myself in a homeness. It feels like home when you're having a good trip. And time really changes a lot because the self itself is time. So the ayahuasca journey was actually very traumatic, and like I didn't have a lot of trauma to purge. My mother protected me despite the general hardship and the crushingness. I was protected from like molestation. A pedophile tried to abuse me in Big Brothers Big Sisters. There's a potential lawsuit going on about that. But I was protected because I communicated openly with my mother, and she had mother's intuition plus spiritual intuition, and she followed it. A lot of parents don't follow that little voice in their head that says something's wrong here, and she got the slightest little thing that there's something off about this guy from this Big Brothers Big Sisters thing, and she's like, huh. And she's so busy. Like when you're poor, you have to work 3 times harder. She was trying to start a floral business to support us kids, and I'm so proud of her. And she took time out and she said no. And she called up the place where this guy came from, and she said, "Can you tell me something about this guy?" And the woman on the other side of the phone, said, "This is all confidential. I'm not supposed to tell you too many details at all, but I'll tell you this. If that was my kid, if your kid was my kid, I would not put him around that man." And she hung up the phone, called my dad, even though they were divorced, called him up because my dad's a pretty strong dude, and went over there where I was, and basically got me out of there, and then brought me to the police station to report him. And to tell you how close it was, and how lucky and how fortunate I feel to pay back this world, is that the next kid who came after me, my police report, I guess, didn't do enough. The kid that came after me, I met him on the bus a few years later, like 2 or 3 years later. He was on my bus, because poor kids in poor areas end up in the same demographics, right? So this kid knew me.
Mm-hmm.
And he turned around, he sat right in front of me. And by this time I was like one of the older kids on the bus. You sit in the back. And he turned around and he said, "Are you Mark?" And I said, "Yeah." And I kind of recognized him, but I couldn't remember where. And he said, "Yeah, I was the kid that came after you." And it was very graphic what he said. I don't even know if I should say it in a podcast, but he was severely molested.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll just leave it there. That's how close I came. And it turns out that these organizations with kids there's tremendous amounts of abuse, right? And that's partly why I think society is deteriorating, is because all that pain and suffering, and all these gymnastics clubs and hockey clubs and the church, and it's everywhere. It was like somehow it spread, and I got through that. So my ayahuasca experience was sort of taking on the pain of the world, it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of my own pain, like I had already healed my own inner pain. I had recognized my journey. I had looked at my parents. What was I supposed to do here? A whole bunch of inner work was done, a lot of psychology. I never saw a professional psychologist. I actually did it all myself and got to a very positive place. And then later in university, started studying it and passing it on to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But the journey was very dark for me, because I was taking on a lot of the energy in the actual physical room we were in. And I didn't go to Peru to do it. I would recommend to anybody listening to this, don't do it outside of these spiritual centers. Like, go to Peru, like, spend the money, go with people you trust, and go to real shamans. The guys that I had, I think, were inexperienced. Like, that's the best, one of the more positive explanations. But the second explanation is that they might have been just gang members abusing these drugs and these religious rites to take advantage of people. And you spend a lot. Like, you spend like $2,000 to go to these things. And if you get like 30 people or even 10 people, it's worth a night or two. And we went there on the first trip, ended up leaving the ceremony, like peak ayahuasca, like phenomenology. And we ended up leaving because one of my friends, these are long stories, I can go on forever, but I'll sort of like keep them kind of brief. I went with two of my friends, and one of them is really sensitive and started moaning through the whole ceremony. And he took the drug 10 minutes before we did because it went around in a circle, and he was on the opposite end of us. And it started hitting him, and they started like laying him down, doing normal shaman kind of things. And we're like, okay, cool. And then he kept moaning, and they sat him up, and then they started to like shake his arm a little bit, and then they started yelling at him, and then they violently started shaking him, and like we're like, what is going on here? Something's wrong. And of course, we're starting to experience this alternative world, and so our experience is like, oh my god, are we gonna pass out here pretty soon? Like, are we in some kind of cult? Like, do we make a mistake? So my friend and I get out of the room. I look at him. I'm like, oh my god, what do we do? And he said, well, I said, should we go back in there and grab our guy and get the heck out of here? And like, we could have went back in there and actually got abducted because they're like, okay, these guys found us out. We need to like get out of here. Because when you're that high, right, you don't know what is real and what's not really real anymore. Your mind is so vastly open to infinite possibilities. It's like you start seeing eternity. So we're like, okay, we could die going back in there. And for us, it was very real. I'm sure if somebody else was seeing us, it was looking like Cheech and Chong maybe or something. But it was very real to us because we were in a different city and it was unfamiliar. And I looked my friend in the eye, and there was a soul connection that happened. He said, no, we came together, we leave together. And it was like being in war. It was like being in World War II for us. And that's when I knew I could trust him. And we went back in there, hauled our friend, pushed these shamans off of him, hauled him out of there on our shoulders, like we're pulling him out of the trenches or something like that. And we left the ceremony. And it was the middle of winter, so we could have froze to death. I had no real sense of direction. Like it was bad. We could have had a really disastrous experience. But we ended up bringing him back to the place we were staying, and they were just throwing up like crazy. And we were just like rocking this trip by ourselves, navigating like infinity without anybody there. And because I love these guys, that's what I think kept it stable. But like the moon was in the room with us, and like you could feel time across like infinite space. And I look, this is where the peak sort of happen, where it starts to get a little bit. This is like when they talk about ayahuasca and their journeys. This is what they're talking about: is this moment that happens to you where you have to let go. And right before I was deciding whether or not to let go, I looked over at the cat that was in the room with us, and I felt like I was the cat, and the cat was me. So you start getting these feelings of classic oneness. But instead of having it just in that intuitive sense that I always kind of had, or in this like very superficial, like Hollywood sort of, dramatized sense, it was very simple directness. What Buddha was saying, what all those mystics were saying suddenly made tremendous sense to me in a phenomenological sense. I always knew it in my intuition. I always felt it, felt connected. But to really like look at a physical cat right in front of you and know what the cat's experience was like was really mind-bending. Mm-hmm. So quantum entanglement, all these other things I studied in physics suddenly had another dimension to them. And if you're trapped in your reality and you want to break out, ayahuasca will do that for you. But make sure you're not in a traumatic space. Make sure that you're in a place where if your trauma does come out, it's a safe and you have an experienced shaman there to guide you through it. Because when you let go, there's like a dark side, there's like a negative side that can kind of happen to you. Mm-hmm. And if you hold on to that negative side, it's kind of like, I don't know if you watch Contact with Jodie Foster. You ever see that movie?
No, I have not.
It's a really great movie with Carl Sagan, but there's a moment where they have like this alien device that they built, and then it transports you in these wormholes and stuff, and they didn't follow the instructions entirely. They put like this chair in there, and mm-hmm. the original design was like just to float in the orb, but they thought when you drop the orb, she's going to, hurt herself. So they added this extra piece on, and it almost killed her because it was tied to the outside of the hull that was vibrating violently, and so it was vibrating her in the seat violently, and it actually broke the chair off. And so this extra human piece added to her experience added a bunch of turmoil. And so if you're in an ayahuasca trip going through these like wormholes of experience, and you're adding more complicated pieces to the matter, you'll go down this darker side, and it will not be as positive of an experience as you might think, it can sometimes lead you into states of real disorientation. That's why the shamans guide you. It's called divine of death for a reason, I think. It really leads you to your limits.
That's fair.
That's all I would advise, is to just be careful around it and make sure that if you do it in these spaces,
so that you don't feel like Jodie Foster.
So you don't feel like Jodie Foster.
Understood.
You get through the wormhole.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I think that's good for the spiritual awakenings. There's two more parts I wanted to cover as well, because I know you did the unionizing work, and then I know you did some work with a group called Make Poverty History, which I believe you are the president, CEO of, or something. So if you wanted to give like a quick rundown on those, maybe 10 minutes each. I was thinking, because I know those are sort of the two activisms, or the two outlets of your activism that you worked with sort of prior to the New World Spirit.
Yeah, this is a little more normal, right? These other things were very rare too. Most of my spiritual journey was inner stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But Make Poverty History was me getting into the activist world once I was in university. And I wanted to do something that wasn't just charity. Mm-hmm. Because my philosopher, by this point, I was in university for a physics degree, was going to go to the Large Hadron Collider and cause a spiritual scientific paradigm shift there, using measurements and getting out of the woo-woo stuff that New Age spirituality is known for.
Sorry, what
becomes a bit of a...
What were you planning to do with the Hadron Collider?
Cause a spiritual scientific paradigm shift.
With the Large Hadron Collider?
Yeah, because back then, right, they weren't quite sure what they're going to find, but there was the God particle, the Higgs boson, mm-hmm. right? And so I felt like that was the edge of human consciousness in terms of like actually knowing the truth. What actually is there in society, in reality? And I thought, well, philosophy initially, once I got out of New Age consciousness, right? Once I realized it wasn't enough for me, it got me started on the path of synchronicity, and that led me to philosophy. And philosophy was pretty dry. It didn't have the same mysticism. But there was a book that I was given that I found after this Less Than Prophecy and all these other books that I started reading. It was called The Dancing Woolly Masters by Gary Zukav, who I think was Oprah's like spiritual advisor or something when Oprah was famous, and guiding a lot of these single moms through the materialist hellhole that we're going to enter into. Mm-hmm. So I ended up reading this Dancing Woolly Masters, and that's where I found out this connection between philosophy, spirituality, and quantum mechanics.
Okay.
And so that's where I ended up getting into a physics degree, ended up having a philosophy minor, and then seeing Make Poverty History come along through these TED Talks and saying, I felt called to do something about poverty. I wanted to do something when I was young enough to do it. Started at the TED Talks. Their proposal was not just charity. They said it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about your voice. And there's something wise about that made it feel like my inner philosopher wanted to give my time to it, because it felt like it was going to make a difference. And not in the superficial way of like, when you're in poverty, you get a lot of hand-me-downs, you get a lot of charity, you get a lot of stuff that doesn't fix the structural root issues. So it like perpetuates your suffering. Mm-hmm. And that drove me crazy when I was young. I was like, oh my gosh, they don't actually care. This is just to make them feel good and keep them comfortable. Like all this type of structural stuff came into my awareness. So when I got into it, I didn't want to do that to anybody else. I wanted them to experience real liberation. And so Make Poverty History was that. It had a nice veneer of celebrities and all this stuff that looked like it was charity and superficial, but underneath it was a coalition of the world's most powerful, experienced poverty organizations that knew the data. They knew the cultures, they knew the past mistakes, they knew the naivety, they knew the volunteerism. They had all this amazing wisdom that resulted in this wise campaign of, it's not about your money, it's about your voice. We have more than enough resources to solve the world's problems. We could feed the world 1.5 times over with the food that we're already producing. We produce like $400 billion worth of wasted food every year. Yet we have 1 billion people who are obese and 1 billion people who are starving to death. Right? So it's a culture, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of being. And that's where I felt like, that's where there's another spiritual scientific paradigm shift that can happen.
So what exactly...
I postponed.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I was going to say, what exactly did Make Poverty History do? Like, what were your activities that you participated in as part of that?
So I thought the university could play a big role in causing a deeper shift because there was a lot of talent at universities, and having experienced things in Bonnyville versus the university, I thought, okay, there's more potential to do white collar stuff at the university, run a student group, and basically scale the student group up to the university level, and then work with the United Nations, and then eventually scale up this new kind of culture, this sort of spiritual culture that had very strong scientific roots that could change the political structure. So we would actually vote in a way that would solve or actually fulfill Canada's 0.7% aid commitment, because the first goal was more and better aid. The second commitment was trade justice, which fix our trade rules, because for every dollar of aid that we gave a developing country, we would get $7 back through unfair trade. And that was the sort of sickness that I saw that was so hypocritical. This dialectical irony that was built into society was really starting to drive me crazy. And so I wanted to hit that root. I wanted to stop that hypocrisy that was happening to our species, where the path to hell was paved with our good intentions. And it seemed like Make Poverty History was wise enough to prevent that from happening and hitting these deeper asks, right? Not just more aid, better aid. Mm-hmm. Not just aid, but trade justice. And not just trade justice, but canceling the debt that had been racked up through all this economic imperialism from the developed countries, especially the United States after the Cold War. We enslaved a lot of countries through debt, especially Africa. So we wanted to cancel that debt. And then the last thing was local. And it was dealing with child poverty in Canada, which hadn't moved since like 1990, despite all these political empty promises. So I had a global component and a local component, which I really liked.
And it was an advocacy group.
Yeah, it was like an advocacy group, yeah, except it had more teeth to it. And it was about, I guess, forming policy and having a grassroots direction.
And so, sorry, so this was an already existing movement, and you like took over the Edmonton chapter, or how does it work exactly?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it was a little tumultuous how I started it, because I really wanted to work with people who believe they could change the whole world. And there's a sort of grandiosity to that can lead to, pathologies and a bunch of aberrant personality disorders. But when you do it in the right way, when you do it with a deeper wisdom and not naivety, there is a way that individuals can change the world. And you have that Margaret Mead quote of, in fact, it was only ever small groups of people that were just wise and intelligent about their activism, and then leveraged that to create huge movements. So I believed in that a lot, and when I tried to get into the Make Poverty History movement, I didn't really necessarily want to run it myself. I'm always like, okay, is there somebody who's qualified to do this? And I met the chapter lead that was there, and I wasn't impressed. I thought, oh no, this is people trying to get into med school, padding their resume. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to give my energy to this. This is just a waste. This is more of the charity stuff that's going to do a little bit of goodness, that'll perpetuate the suffering, and then these people go to med school and make a bunch of money later. And I still love them, but I knew it was naive. They were in these bubbles of like middle class or upper class privilege. So I thought, okay, they don't understand how much work it's going to take to change this. So I said, okay. I proposed a couple of ideas because I like to work with people. I said, hey, what about this? And they were kind of bigger ideas. And of course, they're like, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. And we can't do that. We can't do that. Why? Because it would take too much time. It would take away from their studies, and it would take away from basically the real path of self-preservation in a very draconian society. So I said, okay, I'm going to go and start the university branch then, and you guys can run the Edmonton branch, and I will support you. So I used that freedom at the University of Alberta to launch basically what would become the Edmonton group. We eventually replaced them. And we became one of the best chapters in all of Canada, that the Canadian branch was sending people to us. And then I met people at Carleton University, and that's how I got to New York City, met Jeffrey Sachs, and started working on the Millennium Development Goals, and really kind of grew from there.
Because you've been with them for like
vision.
18 years or so, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a long time. I started in 2008, or 2007 even. I have a white band on my arm that's still on my arm since 2007. So I've had a white band on my arm every single day, every minute, for what is it now? That's
2007?
Yeah, 2007. So that's 10.
18 years?
13. Yeah, it is 18 years. Yeah, good math.
Thank you.
So it's been a very long slug, long haul. And a lot of the stuff that we did in Make Poverty History has been reversed now on campus. I went away for 6 years, and I came back, and all the fair trade certification that we did to address the trade justice. The culture on campus has become even more oppressive. They're literally violating charter rights. The Canadian charter rights and freedoms are being violated to suppress the desire for people to rise up against this mega crisis that's hitting us. Like
Well,
there's 6 existential threats.
we'll get into that in the second hour. You're skipping
Yeah,
ahead a
so
little.
I could segue. It has been
Yeah.
50 minutes, but
Yeah, we're close. Well, the
you're
last
right.
one I want to hear about is the union organizing, because I know you did that for a little bit.
That's right. In fact, that's what took me out of the university was oil collapsed in Alberta. Couldn't really afford my education. I didn't want to go back into debt. And after about 8 years of organizing on the campus, we did become the best group on campus. We won all these awards, like I said, and was very proud of being um, the sort of vision behind that. And I left though because we had gotten to a point where we needed to scale. We had like 66 volunteers full time, and for kids going to school full time, it's quite a feat to do that when you're not paying them anything, except for a little bit of recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And they believed in the vision, right? When you set an inspiring vision, it motivates people, especially when you're giving your heart, mind, and soul to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up developing a system, a task management system that we tried to patent so we could protect it from patent troll firms and stuff that we're starting to develop and has distorted the IP world. Like, in fact, intellectual property is far more profound than how we treat it in modernity. It's the divine idea in sensuous form. IP, like ideas, are these incredibly powerful. Like, if you think about it, it's mystical. Like, where do these things come from? It's like you birth something out of nothing. You combine some things in a new way, and then all of a sudden you have a new way of life, a new idea, a new product, new service. And so I realized that the intellectual property system was a part of this spiritual paradigm shift that we needed to have happen if we're going to be wise about it and not just naive, thinking, oh, protest your politicians and it's going to change things. Well, no, they've done studies to show, literally in the United States, that even if the person you elect gets into power, their legislative abilities affects policy virtually none at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like zero effect. So it showed that democracy is actually a sham, and it wasn't like some conspiratorial. It was an academic study. It was very like secular, very normal, and it was shocking, the results. So we knew that contacting our politicians was part of like raising awareness, but we needed to do something more powerful in terms of organizing the people in a non-profit environment and making that non-profit competitive with the draconian capitalism that was going on. Not that capitalism is bad in and of itself. When it's isolated by itself, it can reach its limits and leave people behind. But we wanted to create something that could be competitive, have some profit in a non-profit environment, and that's what we call a social enterprise. And that was, budding at the time that Make Poverty History had matured. And so I thought, okay, we're going to take this software system, we're going to try and patent it for these social enterprises to use, and then charge a big premium to these corporations, like what Microsoft was doing with SharePoint, which we couldn't afford. So I spent 6 years trying to patent this thing, and they changed the patent laws in 2014. That 6 months before I filed my patent, they changed it so that you couldn't file software patents like Facebook did. And that's what my goal was. And so I spent 6 years battling that. And in the middle of that, I got it finished. I coded it. It was running. And then the pandemic hit. And then I was working with Uber, which sort of leads into the unionizing. I was working with Uber because the software we had made was going to mimic what Uber was doing. Like, we were going to provide goods and services through this sort of much more equitable lens. And I thought, well, I wonder how they're running their algorithm. So I went down there, worked for them, and found out that they were basically creating modern slavery. And it took 3 years to prove it. It took 8 months to realize that something was wrong, because they manipulate you like crazy with this artificial intelligence. And when we found out that they were using artificial intelligence, and that the CEO of Uber back then was openly and proudly saying how they were hiring social scientists and economists and all these people to manipulate the drivers, watch their micro impulses, watch how they push the brakes and their GPS data to make you work longer for less, it was a sickening feeling when we realized that. It takes about 8 months for them to start crushing you, but it took 2 more years to like track all the deliveries and make spreadsheets and get tax professionals to show that we were actually being paid $4 an hour after all the deductions and all this, oh, you work for yourself, and all this stuff that sounds really good. It was all manipulation. And if you factor in how much damage your vehicle takes on, it's actually exactly zero. Like you make literally nothing. So you destroy your vehicle, you feel like you're wasting all your time, and then at the end of it, you have no money to fix yourself, so you have to go get a real job. So that's where we started becoming scared that AI was being used to enslave millions of people, because Uber was doing this to 3 million people worldwide in like 10,000 cities or something. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, we do not want these guys being the future. They're in the wrong spirit. They're in the wrong mentality. This is not make poverty history. This is make poverty forever. And I'm not exaggerating there. I ended up partnering with UFCW, which is the largest food union in Canada, the United Food and Workers Cooperative. And they told us that they were very well aware of what was happening with Uber, and that they were already working with people in Toronto and Vancouver. So I got them started in Calgary, and we joined up in forces, and they were telling us that not only were they paying us nothing, but they were hiring the world's best anti-union lawyers to go into each country and start dismantling all the labor protections under this new gig economy type of excuse. Mm-hmm. And really all it was to undo 200 years of labor protection since the Industrial Revolution to basically create a permanent class of underworkers, is what they called it.
I mean, yeah,
that was their expression.
I wouldn't doubt that.
Yeah, no, here we are like a few years later, and now we're all starting to realize what AI really means. They were just way ahead of the curve, right? So that's why we have to act now, and why I escalated so dramatically the unionizing to a hunger strike. And I slept in my car. Like I realized that it wasn't enough just to get Calgary going. Mm-hmm. We had to get Edmonton, Airdrie, Red Deer, all the main centers in Alberta going. And we had to do it faster than the algorithm could predict, because these anti-union guys, they know how long it takes for human beings to get organized. They've had hundreds of years of watching this. So I knew that they were going to be predicting us, and that the algorithm tries to spread you out so that like it maximizes its profit and its like surface area coverage. So it's not like a normal workplace. It's very hard to meet other workers because there's no central place that you can go. And when you're showing up to a place to pick up a delivery, often the other guy's just leaving. So there's like never any chance that you could stop and start organizing. And that freaked us out even more, how hard it was to actually get momentum. So what I did is I used a lot of my activist experience and all the stuff I had learned over like 10 years of Make Poverty History, right? I knew what I was in for, so I prepared to make the sacrifices, and I thought, okay, there's no way for me to do this in just Calgary. And I wasn't making enough money by this point after 3 years to afford places in all these cities. So my sister's future husband was living in Edmonton, and I said, can I stay with you for a week at a time to like unionize drivers? So he's like, okay, you can do that. And he was going to med school at the time, so it was like, it was dicey intruding on his like long hours. But I ended up living out of my car in Airdrie and Red Deer. So between Calgary, I would stay with my sister, and then in Edmonton, I would stay at his place. And in between, I would spend a week at a time living out of my car in Airdrie and Red Deer and try and unionize the guys by just hanging out in the parking lots. Like I would sacrifice my deliveries and just wait for a guy to show up, and I would just like bypass it was hurting my profit motive even more. But I would actually get their phone number and say, hey, we're unionizing. And I did that and got 800 phone numbers from talking to guys in the parking lots. And the unions were blown away. They're like, oh my God, Mark, how did you do that? And he said, these are like, there's a lot of racism in these lower levels of work, right? So like 90% of the Uber drivers are Somali, they're immigrants, they're just marginalized people that Uber can exploit. So you get a white guy walking around saying, hey, I care about you. And they're like, I don't believe you. Like, get away from me, colonialists. But I was able to earn their trust because of all my Make Poverty History experience. Mm-hmm. And they could look me up on the internet and they could see that it was real. And I made all these sacrifices. And that sacrifice is really what gets people to get out of their ordinary bubbles of culture. And so they said, Mark, you did 10 years of activism in like 8 months. And I said, yeah, thank you. And that's how we were able to push Uber very quickly. But they wanted to slow me down. They said, well, okay, we don't want to do a press release yet. We want to sort of like do all this stuff. And I said, I kind of agree with that. But you're playing into Uber's game. Like, they know that you're going to do this. So let's keep up this momentum, because they don't know that we just did 10 years of activism in like 8 months. So we need to keep that surprise motive up. So I went on a hunger strike at the end to really motivate not just Uber, but to push the unions to not fall into this comfortable trap of basically gang, like mafia type unionizing. And they said it's actually like that in there.
Okay,
so we don't want to fall into that.
Final question for this section. Was that your first hunger strike?
So yes, that was my first hunger strike. None of my activism was that extreme. It was always
Okay.
very normal, very positive. Posters, normal events, normal protests, normal letter writing. We just did it very well. But this is where I actually started risking my life, and that's because I realized what was coming.
Okay, that's fair. Well, that is the end of the first hour, the biographical hour, as I would like to say. But I am going to give both of us a little 5-minute break. I might go refill my tea, go use the bathroom, something like that. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in. You are listening to Callipolis Radio. This is my interview with Mark McCormack, the leader, founder, etc., of New World Spirit. And we will be back in about 5 minutes. Thank you so much for listening. All right, Mark, are you still there? Maybe not.
Still alive, yeah.
Oh, you are still there. Okay, perfect. All right, well, welcome back, everyone, to the second hour of our interview with Mark McCormack. You're listening to Callipolis Radio. A big thank you to all our channel members, as we mentioned at the beginning. Oh, the dog is bumping into my camera. That should be fine. All right, so as I mentioned briefly at the beginning before you were on here, the way I first became aware of your existence and your movement was through the University of Alberta. So there was a guy in one of my classes that was talking about Hegel a lot and talking about hunger strikes, and then you'd find him on the main quad in a sleeping bag with a big sign about the polycrisis. So obviously the current stage of activism, the part in your activist career that you're on right now, is this New World Spirit movement and the universal logic. So for this hour, we're going to get into what exactly that is, what your current cause is, and its nature and its things. So why don't you? Would you like to start with the polycrisis, the mega crisis, the New World Spirit? Where would you like to begin? How do you get people into this? Give us like a elevator pitch of your movement.
Okay, I really appreciate this. Thank you. The mega crisis is very large. Obviously, it's a name that I gave because we needed some way to communicate the overall problem that we have, because there's a lot of labels for what's going on. And there's a lot of people who are good at saying what the problem is, but not what the solution is. But even when they state the problem, it's not very clear. So for us, we boiled it down very simply into 6 major categories. The first one is the mega crisis, the overarching, which has a meta crisis and a polycrisis in it. And those two large problems are playing off each other. But they're nested. It's not like the mega crisis is separate from these two. It's just the exponential result of both of them compounding. Because as one gets worse, the other one gets worse. As the other one gets worse, the other one gets worse. So together, they're forming a dynamic that's greater than just one of them at a time. And that combined effect, an exponential effect, is what makes it mega, makes it even more severe than we thought it was going to be. That's why it's moving faster than we are evolved to imagine. We are severely underestimating what's happening to our species because we're looking at it in these silos. But if you look at it all together, then you start to understand why somebody would go on a hunger strike, potentially to the death, right? So the meta crisis is a cultural problem. It's where you have technically a lack of trust brewing across the world. You have a lack of meaning. You have a lack of communication and a lack of collaboration to generate these non-linear solutions to the problems. So in a way, this is the heart of the crisis. This is the heart of the problem, because if you can't work together to generate worldwide solutions that you can't do alone, then you're not going to be able to solve the polycrisis, which is another collection of 5 problems, or 5, not even just problems. These are existential threats to our species. You can't outrun these. There's a lot of people who have a romantic vision of, going off into the mountains and escaping this. That's not going to work. They can use drones to use heat-seeking infrared cameras and find you in the forest, right? Like, unless you have a lead shelter or something, it's not that hard to find people. So anyway, the polycrisis has 5 existential threats. The first one, the most urgent, is artificial intelligence. A lot of people think you can make jokes about it. It's not that serious. It's very serious. That's why the White House is treating it as a national security threat, which we can get into. There's the CRISPR crisis, which is genetic editing. There's the basically World War that's brewing, World War III basically. There's climate change tipping points that we're hitting right now, even though we won't feel them for decades. Fully, we are feeling them, but not the full extent of them. And then we have a mental health crisis that's also causing suicides, depression, anxiety, and despair. So if we don't solve the meta crisis, then we won't be able to collaborate fast enough to solve any of these issues in the poly crisis. And that together, both of those is causing the mega crisis. That's the real problem that we face.
So to clarify, because I know from some of the people I know who are aware of you, again, that mostly university students, they do tend to be a little bit confused on what exactly your whole point is or what exactly you are protesting. I mean, personally, I think your marketing on these issues might need a little bit of work, but to make it
Yeah.
simple, if someone needs a basic introduction, there's these 5 problems, and we can't solve them until we fix this meta crisis that you mentioned. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, to simplify
Okay.
it, that's right.
Okay. And your solution to the meta crisis is
The universal logic.
right. Okay. And
And
now,
you know,
oh, sorry.
just to say one more thing, because stating the problem is half the solution, and I've had hundreds of conversations about this. So you get sort of in this marketing trap where it's either too simple and people are like, oh, you're naive, you don't understand the problem, or it's too complex, and they say, well, now you're complicating it, and you don't got a real strategy. So the sort of sweet spot is sort of that sort of structure of mega crisis, meta crisis, poly crisis. But at the heart of the crisis, like at the heart of all those problems, to really hit home exactly what we need to do is that within the meta crisis, the heart of the crisis, the heart of the heart of the crisis is this. Actually, you know what? Maybe I should just involve you. What do you think is the number one problem that we need to solve to get out of the situation that we're in? What's the one thing that we could do if you had to guess? What do you think is the heart of the crisis? And then I'll tell you what we arrived at. Yes. The real root.
That people all people all recognize these as issues, but when we argue about them, we are not using the same terms, not speaking the same language.
That's right. That's the communication problem within the meta. But there's a problem even deeper than that. This is the philosophical root that's missing. And I'm wondering, as a philosopher in Callipolis,
Callipolis, I've heard both.
Yeah, we're in a beautiful space for this. Can we hit the root? How would you go deeper to say, is there something deeper that could cause the lack of communication?
I mean, the problem is I already know what your answer is to this, so okay. I feel like I'm going to be biased in what I say, but...
Well, let's see. Did you read there's certain posts that I made that hit the updated version of it. I'm wondering if you read the outdated.
Updated version? No, I don't believe I saw the updated version.
Okay, what one did you see?
I mean, the one from like at least a year ago. Probably when we first had that class together.
Well, we found out that David Bohm and Krishnamurti had a conversation once. And they said that the problem was fragmented consciousness. And the more we thought about that, the more we realized that actually is the fundamental problem, the heart of the crisis, because it leads to all the problems in the meta crisis. Lack of trust, lack of communication, lack of collaboration, lack of meaning, all that stuff happens when your mind and the way you filter reality is itself fragmented. And so we thought, well, how do you solve that problem? And that problem is perfectly solved by universal logic. So that is why it's so powerful, and it is the only real solution that we currently have to solve something as fragmented as the current consciousness that's going into an AI, for instance. So that's the real problem. In its full scope, that is the real breadth and depth of the problem right there. That's what everybody's talking about in the world in various fragmented languages. They're taking on one aspect of it usually and not seeing the whole picture. But we think that this is why we're going to be successful, is because we have actually managed to articulate not just the breadth of it, but the core of the core of it, and we have a solution tailored for that.
And so what, for myself, how do I adopt this universal logic so that I can, fix all the crises?
So the first thing is to understand sort of how Copernicus changed the world. This universal logic is a revolution. It's a tectonic shift in not only how we think about the problem, but the solution sets that are currently present are not adequate enough to solve the level of fragmentation that's happening in our species at the rate that it's happening. It's the rate that's the problem. If we were moving like how we were 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe we could, like, our current culture could catch up and maybe do something about this. But we are moving at an exponential rate, and they're thinking we're moving at an exponential rate, a double exponential with AI. So that's why the universal logic is key, because it can cause a paradigm shift that'll fix the fragmentedness in the way that Copernicus changed how we think about the solar system. A lot of people think, oh, cool, Copernicus changed how we think about the rings, how we do the modeling. And so he switched out, he put the sun at the center of the solar system instead of the Earth, right? And so now we have a nice model amongst many hundreds of models of the solar system that existed back in the 1500s or whenever he did this. But the real profound effect that he had was in human identity, because the church at the time, the reason why we had the universe modeled the way, or the solar system modeled the way we did, with the Earth at the center, is because of God, is because our philosophical and spiritual systems were making us the center of the universe, right? And so when he upended those root principles, it had residual effects on our entire consciousness. Our entire species had a crisis. The church, the primary power structure, the hegemon itself, was literally killing people over this. Was like imprisoning people over this because it was so enormous. So universal logic is going to do that to us. You'll first look at it and think, oh, these are just like basic categories that we use every day. Oh, being, nothing, becoming, something, other. How is this going to change the whole world and address AI, CRISPR, world wars, climate change, mental health, and fragmented consciousness? How is this really going to solve that? It's just another logic amongst logics. You got Aristotle's logic, you have analytical logic, you have Boole's logic, you have all these different logics. So at first you're like, okay, you got this Hegelian sort of universal logic. Cool, I have another thing to add to my memory. But when you really grasp the logic, it will cause a revolution in your mind. It will change everything you thought you knew. You will realize in a Socratic masterclass that you actually don't know anything. And at first it's incredibly ungrounding, and exactly the way that Buddha, exactly the way that Karl Popper would even like, because we can falsify this now. Everything you thought, all your groundings, suddenly are up in the air, and you get this feeling of meaningless and a loss of reality. All the structures that you thought had substance to them don't. And that's the first moment of enlightenment. Ayahuasca can kind of do that to you too. But universal logic can do it while you're conscious. That's why it can be a cultural technology that we can use now, and we don't need to drug everybody with the water supply, which people are seriously thinking about. But we don't need to do that. It can cause a lot of damage if you do that, because it has a very random effect. Universal logic can be taught in a very grounding manner, especially as people start to become psychotic, as AI causes something that is known as reality collapse. Like full on, can't tell what is real and what is not as real.
So universal logic is like putting ayahuasca in the water supply.
Yes, except without drugs. And you can take the dose, but you can microdose on it through these like conversations. And they will cause your chemistry in your brain to change. Because every time you have an epiphany, your brain chemistry and your structure changes.
So are you using universal logic right now in this conversation?
Yes, I'm on Iowa. I'm on universal logic 24/7.
Okay, well, that's fair.
And that's why I can speak a lot, is because a lot of things are connected. And people think, oh, is this guy manic? Is he's talking a little bit too much, a little too fast, saying a little bit too much? But I'm trying to really encourage people to slow down the recordings if you can't keep up, because for me, once you understand universal logic, you do a lot more with a lot less, so you have a lot more brain resources, neurochemicals, to keep your mind going, because your words aren't in cognitive dissonance, and cognitive dissonance is what burns a lot of sugar in your mind and causes fatigue. So for me, I'm experiencing a sort of different kind of reality than what I used to experience with ordinary categories. So this is the kind of change we want to have, so that people can enter into flow states, enter their best self, handle the immense amount of work that we have to do in a very short period of time without contributing to the mental health crisis.
So how would I adopt this universal logic? Should I seek to do so?
Yes, I think all of us right now, if you're not going on protests, like peaceful protests, or if you're not going on hunger strikes, or if you're not looking for the heart of the crisis, then in some sense, I think, given all the data that we have on what's happening to us, it's irrational to be going to your 9-to-5 job in the normal way. You can still stay stable. Don't become unstable and then become a charity case, basically. you want to stay stable enough that you can free up your time to take substantial action and make enough space to learn this universal logic, and then participate in the fuller solution, which is this new world intergovernance model that is aligned with the universal logic.
So
it's
how
an
would
actual structure here now.
so how long would you say it would take your average person to learn the universal logic?
You can learn it in 10 seconds in the first layer. So we've, like
Okay.
enlightenment, it's going to take a little bit of work, but we've broken it into 5 competency levels. And
Well,
depending on where your consciousness is at,
could
is where
you
we start, yeah.
baptize me into the 10-second version?
Of course. There's nothing that would make me more hopeful. So the process starts with 3 categories. So all human and divine knowledge and scientific knowledge, all that we could possibly know, fits into 3 main categories. And for most people, these categories aren't known. They look like normal categories. They're mixed in with normal language.
Okay.
And they're disordered. So the first thing we teach you is a process called CHISI or FISI. And it stands for an acronym CHSI, Collective Human Superintelligence. Some people in the religious community would call it spirit. Some people would call it general intelligence, collective general intelligence. Humans have general intelligence, not just AI.
Mm-hmm.
But these 3 categories are the top-level ontology and epistemology that your mind is using to organize everything.
Okay.
So first of all, Hegel provides that for us, and he says these are the 3 words that you have to get right at the beginning so you can start getting out of the chaos of the fragmented consciousness that we're in. So the 3 categories are, I'll say them, and then you can kind of pick what wise vibe tribe you're in. It kind of gives you the vibe of where your mind is and how you categorize things. So I'll say the 3 categories are nature, logic, spirit. Those
Okay.
are the 3 words that have a lot more gravity than people realize. So would you put them in that order? Nature, logic, spirit. Would you say the first one is nature and the last one is spirit, or would you change up that order?
What am I basing my ordering upon?
On what you feel sounds and feels the most true to you. Either intuitively, rationally, however as you measure the truth right now, how would you order those?
I would probably go spirit, nature, logic.
Okay. Spirit, nature, logic.
Oh,
And now if you had to justify that, how would you justify? Why would you, if you had to tease it out, why would your mind organize those words that way?
Well, I'm not a particularly huge fan of logic and or math, so I think that's the thing. Your movement. Also, I need to say that was more than 10 seconds. You didn't.
Well, no, I still haven't told you what the actual
Okay.
order is. I could just tell you what the order is, and that takes 10 seconds. But then it kind of doesn't let your mind work it out.
That's
So
fair.
you can't really see why it's powerful. So you didn't get the right order. That's why this will work in terms of the universal logic's answer.
Well, because I would
in
say
terms
it's
of your
like
model.
logical thinking is not my usually first go-to. It's usually some sort of, I take an intuition or feeling first, which I would say, based on sort of classical philosophy, is kind of our spirit or the origin of the emotions, the unconscious thinking. And so I would say I address things with the spirit first, and then turn to nature or like the physical world for the actual empirical observations in regards to something. And then probably last comes logical working out once you've sort of taken the world into account after you've had your sort of first intuitions about a situation. So it would be like intuition and then take the world into account and then logic it out should you need to, is probably how I would approach most things.
So that was incredibly self-aware of you. Like that's very powerful what you said. I learned a lot about you, and so did the audience. And you're going to realize as you know more about the universal logic that why we start this way. And you're technically in wise vibe tribe number 1. We call them wise vibe tribes because it rhymes, it's an earworm. But it is about wisdom. Wisdom has to do with these 3 first categories of cognition. And the way that we organize these 3 categories determines how fragmented our consciousness is in terms of the universal logic. So you ordered it spirit, nature, logic. That's tribe 1. But if you try and map out all the combinations, there's 6 combinations that you could possibly put those in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's 6 different tribes that all of humanity in terms of universal logic would fit into. So you're in a vibe. You don't know exactly why, like you kind of explained it just now, but it gives you a high level general feeling of how people's minds work in general in that tribe. So people that put those 3 words in that order, you will like much more than anybody else in any of the other tribes. It's a very, very powerful way to start a movement and organize people so that the fragmentation that's ripping us apart in the meta crisis, we can sort of bring it into a kind of coherence right away and say, hey, tribe 1 and tribe 3, they fight immediately. If you try to have a conversation with people who put those words in nature, logic, spirit, instead of spirit, nature, logic like you did, you guys will disagree on almost every single word.
So
because your words will be categorized differently.
So step 1 of fixing everything is a personality test.
It's a consciousness, it's a coherence test of truth, actually, yeah. So it's not just your personality kind of fits into it, this defines your personality, but it's really the structure of meaning.
So it's like it's a personality test for the way you think philosophically.
It's how you model for truth. So this is how the fragments of truth in your mind are organizing reality, and this is your vibe. So we know that you like to start with feeling. That's your vibe, right? A lot of people start with logic, right? Those guys will have almost an opposite vibe to you. So if you start with those guys, you're going to have different methodologies, different institutions, different starting points, different ending points. Almost everything you will do is diametrically opposite, and you will have a lot of cognitive dissonance and probably hate those people and not collaborate, communicate, love, trust, or have a deeper sense of meaning with them. And then you'll be contributing to the meta crisis. So we found out that our language skills right now are not sufficient to bridge those tribes. That's why we're facing World War III. That's why despair and hopelessness is growing, especially across Canada. It sounds so simple, but fixing these 3 categories really starts to fix the vibe.
Like putting them in
so that's why we start
putting them in the proper order.
Yes. So there's 2 different ways to put them in proper order, though. So there's the ultimate. And this is the cheat sheet. So if I say this, your audience will get an immediate advantage. We don't normally tell people right off the bat because you have to work through it through a process called Chizzy. But for you, I'll just tell it because we need to start moving quickly.
Fair.
So the real way that universal logic orders them in what we call absolute coherence, super coherence, is actually tribe 5, which is logic first, nature, then spirit. But the way that you justified spirit is actually misappropriated to formal spirit. It's actually what logic does. But because we understand logic in the fragmented way, we misattribute the properties of each category to the other categories, which is why it's leading to confusion. It's because if you try and carry those out with that word, you end up in contradictions that end up undermining what your vibe is. So the most powerful thing that I can say in 10 seconds is like, the real super coherent order is logic, nature, spirit. Absolute truth in all science follows that order. But there's a trick to it. And this is why even people who know that and have read Hegel, they still don't understand the power of the words. Is because you can rotate those 3 categories and maintain the inner order even though the starting points are different, because these words are actually connected in a circle, a trinity. So you can actually have 3 different combinations of the true inner order, but you can have 2 or 3 wrong combinations of the order and the starting point. So if you have the wrong order and the wrong starting point, that's where it's really hard to make coherence. Even though you might have intuition of the true order, your mind is mapping it in the fragmented way. So if you're in one of the tribes that has a different starting point on the circle, but you maintain the inner order, you still have what we call half-truth. So you have like a more coherent language, and you're probably a little bit more successful in some organizational sense. So that is what we call rotation of the absolute syllogism.
So
these, yeah.
I had 2 further questions. 1, how long would you say it takes someone to reach a full understanding of the universal logic?
Well, there's 2 ways to understand it. You can understand the nature, and then you can understand the particularity. The particularity never ends for us. It's by definition, according to Gödel's incompleteness theorem, if anybody knows that, this moment of created reality that we're in is by definition endless. So the particularities you're not supposed to know unless you want to end the game of life and go back to all-knowing in the ultimate way. But the magic, the trick here to bring beauty on earth, Callipolis, for instance, is to know the universal nature of all those particulars. That's the timeless truth of wisdom. So to know the particular endpoint is an infinite refinement that you never get to the end of. So
Okay.
don't try and chase that.
So it's never
Just enjoy the process. Enjoy the journey. But
Okay,
the
so like
universal though,
the
you
use.
can know.
So you said like the first stage is knowing those three categories. What are the following stages? What are the following initiations?
So the following stages to refine that, to know the ordering and to know the starting points, and then go deeper into that. You can take those three categories and then divide those into three more categories. So you go from 3 to 9. And those
Sacred
9
numbers.
categories are, yeah, well, 3, 6, 9, yeah, it goes in trinities. And trinities of trinities are completenesses. So all this sort of mystical language and all this stuff that sounds a little bit like impractical numerology and all this, it actually does have a scientific basis in terms of conceptualizing reality in these shells of perfection, these shells of coherence or comprehension, you can call them. So the thing is to continuously refine these three top level categories, and this is what gets you into the nature of wisdom. The nature of wisdom you can know, even when you're finite in the endlessness, because a universal is true for all time, for all particularities. Right? So that's why if you know a universal, you don't need to know the particulars. That's why it's okay to have endlessness. The endlessness is just to keep the moment fresh and alive, so you're not going in this bad infinite that starts to get boring. It keeps things kind of fresh, and the universals make sure it's a living sort of knowledge that self-transcends non-linearly, so you're not stuck in these bad infinite loops that are tautologies. Okay. So you asked me how long did it take to know this universal side. Well, this is what took me 4,000 hours to learn. But that's because I had to read it from Hegel and all these divine texts in a very slow process where you have to know the whole before you can even know a part. But if you learn the living word, if somebody's alive and they can speak it and they can adjust and dance with you through these categories, you can get multiplier effects where you can do what I did in 4,000 hours. I think we can get people to do with this Chizzy process in dozens or hundreds of hours in the first shells. And there's 5 shells. So you just did the first shell. The first competency level is doing Chizzy or Fizzy at level 1, which is just the first 3. You don't overcomplicate it. People will debate these orders for days and weeks. Once you start getting into these other tribes, these 6 tribes will war with each other. Because as you try to justify your order and say, no, my order is right, we should have humanity doing it this way, you will bring in more and more words. But those words that you use to try and justify these top level words are also fragmented. So it starts to turn into this like infinite process that never seems like it ends. But the way that we do it, it does end, because these words are absolutes that finally anchor on a stable point of meaning that we can all agree upon, rationally and scientifically.
Okay, so
there's only one tribe that can do that.
If I can sum up what's been going on so far for anyone who's just tuning in now. So there's a polycrisis and a metacrisis, which are the issues of the world, and they form a subset of the megacrisis. And the way we fix the megacrisis is by adopting the universal logic, and the way you adopt the universal logic is going through a process called Chizzy. Is that correct?
So far, it's not, to do Chizzy is not enough. Because people who are natural philosophers can do this with their natural brain chemistry and meditative personalities. But the problem that we're facing now is that our culture right now is so spiritually and scientifically ADHD that we don't have the attention span to sit down and do the Chizzy process. So what we have to do, and all philosophers through history, including Plato, said that what you need to do is meet the basic human animalistic needs first, so that people feel like they're not in a panic, so that they can sit and focus their minds in a safe manner to do this work.
Yeah, this is Maslow's hierarchy, and this is higher up.
Exactly.
It's the Chizzy level of Maslow's hierarchy.
Yes. So, exactly. So what we have to do as the recession and the economic collapse starts to form, as AI displaces all these jobs with no universal basic income, and we have no political consensus because everybody's fragmenting at the political level too, we need to provide a basic level of sustenance and psychological safety in this new form of intergovernance, this new form of service and good service provision, so that they can have the space to sit and talk about 3 words that they normally don't think have any sort of power to change the world.
Okay.
And they're going to feel like at first it's a waste of time.
let's say someone out there is listening to this and they're interested in going through this Chizzy process. How would they get in contact with someone who is trained to do so?
You can message our. You can go to our New World Spirit website, so newworldspirit.com. There's like a newsletter sign-up page. So if you message that, that gets to us. Mm-hmm. But if you want to, you can email me directly, my university email, if you want. I can even just say it right now.
You can now. We'll also. I'll give all your links and all your everything at the end as well. So you can add it now if you want to. But at the end, I will put every possible way that people can get in contact with you.
Okay, great. Yeah, because we are just launching the social media right now, but the truth is social media will not be powerful enough to launch an exponential global movement at the rate that the mega crisis is moving. So it will have to be more personal.
What is more powerful than the social media? Walking around and telling people about it?
Word of mouth, yeah. And at first appearances, it looks naive. Just like just like Chizzy, right? Oh, you think that three words, logic, nature, spirit, is going to change the world? Come on, give me a break. So ordinary consciousness doesn't know how to recognize the divine sort of essence, the real science, the real power, substantiality behind our language. It mixes all the words up, and it just treats them all as like similar, except for cultural words that you learned as a child that seemed to be more important, but it was really just the geographical area that you grew up in. So first of all, recognizing what words are the power words. Is where we start to get into this deeper complexity behind the simplicity. Mm-hmm. So that's why people will look at the movement and be like, oh, these guys are totally not going to make a movement. But that's the trick of wisdom. Wisdom is actually simpler. It cuts through. It does more with less. It ephemeralizes the process.
How many people would you say are members of this movement who have adopted the universal logic?
There's probably about 20 of us. And there's probably 5 of us that could probably have the conversation. Nobody knows it as well as I know it right now, but the people I've been training for the last year can have the first and maybe second level of Chizzy. They can manage that, and then when they start getting to the contradictions, then they call me. But we're just starting, right? Because it's very challenging to get people out of ordinary consciousness at first, especially with this simplicity, complexity issue.
I would also like to ask the question, I don't intend this to offend at all, but how would you respond to accusations that you sound like a cult leader? Because this could almost read as though I'm being recruited into Scientology.
No, that's the brutal honesty that will get to the truth of the movement, right? The fact that you feel safe saying that to me means I'm doing my job right. Because if you don't feel safe to negate somebody, then you probably are in a cult, right? Because you're not allowed to question authority. So that's a good sign right now that I'm explaining this openly enough that you can approach it in a logical manner.
How much money does it cost to go through Chizzy?
Free. You're lucky. You're getting a deal because we don't have any time to waste.
Amazing. Yeah, right, you can give a coupon code out at the end of the stream for.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in terms of time management, like once we start like doing this word of mouth thing, it goes exponential quickly because as each person brings in more people, it starts to get that compounding effect. It's extraordinarily powerful. But in terms of the cult thing, if you're an activist, it's the first or second thing that you're always accused of as your movement starts to rise to power. Because the people who are in the current culture, the hegemonic culture, the unquestioned norms culture, they don't realize it, but they are actually the ones in the cult. At least compared to our New World Spirit culture, we allow questioning of every presupposition. We empower people to have the tools of language to question the authority. Whereas in the hegemonic order that current people are in, even science is actually cultish. But right now, what we consider science is actually a faith. If you look up the demarcation problem of science, how do we justify our fundamental axioms? They just look self-evident. They just work. We didn't prove them. They just seem to work. We use them and they have useful results. That's it.
Yeah,
the sun comes up every single time. Exactly. It's like, but we didn't prove that the sun, we have some laws that seem to work good enough, but there's contradictions within the standard model and general relativity, right? So they don't fully make sense, but they work good enough to make predictions and launch satellites. That's still a faith. We, on the other hand, in New World Spirit, we have justified every single rational principle that we use, and there's a self-justification that's not a tautology. So you can question every single principle that we use right to the nth degree, and we won't get mad. If you do that with science or you do that with a religion, they get mad because you're starting to undermine their authority.
So how would you address what is the basis of, I mean, this is getting very technically philosophical. What is the basis of New World Spirit's epistemology? Because how do you overcome the Munchausen trilemma or like Sextus Empiricus's 10 modes?
Maybe explain those so that I know exactly what you're talking about and the crowd can follow through. I have an answer right away, but just to set the context.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's fair. So Sextus Empiricus was the founder of academic skepticism. He had 10 modes to disprove all foundational knowledge or all knowledge claims. And then basically later on in the 1700s, 1800s, they were reduced by another philosopher to the Munchausen trilemma, which are the only 3 that really need to be addressed from Sextus Empiricus's 10. And those were that the foundation of all knowledge claims boil down to one of 3 logical fallacies. Either it is a assertion where it's A is true because A is true, or nothing works without it. It's either linear, which A because B because C because D goes on forever, or it's circular, A because B and B because A. So how does the New World Spirit and the universal logic overcome one or all of these foundations of all knowledge to have any claims that could be regarded as truth?
That is absolutely astounding that you said that. You are a world-class, heroic philosopher, in my opinion. You just
thank you.
gained a bunch of brownie points right there, I have to say. Wow, that lines up the universal logic for a home run. So to answer your first question, the epistemological standard that we use is universal logic. It's an ontology and an epistemology simultaneously. And it gets around all 3 of these critiques in the only way possible. There's only one way to beat the assertion argument, the linearity argument, and the circularity argument. There's only one way to do that, and that's by using negation. He's right. If you make any assertion, any assertoric claim is guaranteed founded upon assumptions and presuppositions that you learned and took for granted in a forward-leading motion that doesn't critique the presuppositions that led to them. So any future assertion that you make off of prior assertions are by definition ungrounded. They're positive, and they're not grounded in themselves. They might look like that, but you have to prove that. And you have to do it presuppositionlessly. And you can't get there through the assertions because you're carrying the assumptions with you in every step. So the only way to get around that is to go inwards, to go backwards, to do the opposite of what ordinary consciousness does by default. You have to do something counterintuitive. That's why ordinary consciousness can't get out of this mode unless you get into something nonlinear. And that means going into negation instead of assertion. Assertion is affirmation, right? So you got to go and negate all your assertions to get down to the root. And that's the thing that we do with New World Spirit. We have something called the proof of truth. So how we prove that we get around the assertion problem, the linearity and the circularity, is that we start with our contingent consciousness, which is all this like absorbed culture that we take for granted, that none of it is proven. It's just one big cult right now that seems to work. You have to negate all that stuff in the same way that Descartes tried to do. Right? He said, okay, if my senses are deceiving me, what can I actually know for certain? Mm-hmm. And so he said, get rid of all the knowledge you think you have that's based on the 5 senses. That's a lot of memories right there. And he says you get down to the cogito. But Hegel says that that's not actually true immediate presuppositionlessness. There's actually 2 things that Descartes is hiding and taking for granted in the cogito. When he says cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am.
That there is a thing that thinks.
Yeah, exactly. There's a thing that thinks and there's thinking. There's 2 things right there, which means there's an implicit something underneath them that could serve as a deeper ground.
Well, because Nietzsche's
not only that,
Nietzsche's critique of the cogito was that it should properly be phrased as it thinks. Because to say I think therefore I am is to add assertions of the I of a thing that thinks. And so all you can really assert is it thinks.
Exactly. That's more fundamental. But even if you go with it thinks, there's still being and thinking. What is the it in the thinking? There's still a duality even at that level. And Hegel gets even beyond that. It's a credit to Nietzsche that he realized that. But there's a deeper level. And only Hegel has gotten past this. The it is actually an is. Is thinking. Or just thinking. Because
sounds like
ontology
Taoism.
and epistemology, yeah, that's exactly what the principle of Taoism is. But not just Taoism. The fundamental principle of all systems of wisdom is actually the same principle in different symbolic wordage. And the proof of truth gets to the universal logical definition of it as a scientific proof. We've translated all these wisdom traditions into a language that modern culture can understand for the first time, which is science, which is based on reason, which is based on logic.
Okay.
So the proof of truth proves the is of the thinking as an ontology and epistemology that claps into a non-duality that is the Tao, that is Brahman, that is pure being, that is Ein Sof,
The thing
that
in itself.
is the thing in itself, exactly. All of them are saying the same first root principle that is presuppositionless if you arrive at it through absolute negation.
Okay, so there's one point I'd like to try and pin you down on in these last 15 minutes of our what do you stand for power hour.
Yeah.
So this would be like, let's say it's just in some comparative religious studies, there's the idea of like the Protestant work ethic, where it's like good works in this world to improve this world are like the shepherding of God's kingdom, the improving of God's kingdom, and that scores you, brownie points with the Lord. Whereas in something like Buddhism or, for example, Taoism, where things just happen and they happen in cycles and there is no progress, then there's no point fixing the hole in a leaking roof if you're leaving the house tomorrow. And that in some of those religions, you can treat the world like a house that you're leaving right away. And so there's no point in fixing or doing anything. So in your system of this universal logic with that, combines mysticism and fixes everything, what is the point of fixing any of those 5 issues? Like why fix the polycrisis, and why not just adapt to the world and let it play out and survive and live the best life you can? Like why bother improving or fixing the world?
That is a classic spiritual bypass that you're addressing directly, saying, yeah, why would you? If everything's already perfect, why would you change anything? Mm-hmm. Especially if you have a spiritual solution. That's the perfect way to frame that. So the way that we think people should frame it in terms of this universal logic and new way of life and inner governance model is that this world is not, it has 2 sides to it. It has a contingent, imperfect side that allows for a certain type of radical freedom to live the circles yourself in a self-grounding way. And then there's the other side of it, which is the laws, the universal laws that adds divine goodness and necessity and science and reason to the chaos. So we here now have chosen in some sense, either divinely or within our contingency, or our contingent soul, our finite soul, have chosen to be in this universe for a very important experience. And you have to do work to realize it for yourself. And if you don't engage in that work, then you don't grow. And the growth process is the point. It's an experience of knowing yourself as the truth in the finite. So you're doing a paradoxical thing here. You're bringing the infinite into the finite and holding them simultaneously without letting yourself go. The hard part, and Buddha did this, and he talked about this, they all did it, Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, all of them, is to be the truth and bring kingdom come now, bring this ideality now, while maintaining your finitude. Because going back, just kill yourself. You go back to God, you go back to the source, you go back to whatever, but you lose the knowledge of that and you return to the immediate or intuition of that, this perfection that is in itself. But the hard part is to be in and for itself, to know itself explicitly as that. And we're needed for that moment because we have to have the separation from it, like a radical separation, to make it real. Not just an illusion and not just something that is a figment of our or God's imagination. Mm-hmm. So the return to God is what we're working towards. And that's what spirit is. When you make the first bridge back from pure thought in nature, back to pure thought in itself, that bridge that transcends nature is what remembering feels like of the truth. And then you can bring those universals as ideas. They first come as ideas. You can bring them into material reality by acting in the wakefulness of them. And that wakefulness is just the logic. But your logic is how you frame reality and move your body and move everything. So that's why if your consciousness is fragmented, if that bridge is fragmented, your actions are going to be fragmented, and you're going to bring in more fragmentation and chaos and contingency rather than this destiny, this feeling of an alignment with the goodness of real reason. And real reason isn't the dead reason that we teach in university right now. It is a mystical kind of reason that is not superstitious, though. Right? Hegel's very careful to say, no, we're not going back to superstitious reason. and mysticism. This is a rational kind of mysticism that's even more profound than this sort of superficial kind. It's like junk food mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
The real stuff requires carrying with this infinite process that is ever refining, but has an infinite nature that you can know in all that refinement. So it provides this kind of safety. So that's the answer, is to say, even though things do have a perfect side, you have to do the work to actualize it in whatever dimension reality that you manifest yourself in. And right now,
So
we have chosen a reality that's really challenging.
in a sense, reality, or the world, or the universe, whatever you'd like to call it, is sort of a school for the spirit. And you're here to learn a lesson by kind of improving it and working within it. And to do nothing would be to sort of abnegate that duty.
Yeah, exactly. Like Einstein said, the only thing for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing.
There you go.
And a lot of people in the spiritual New Age community, if you look at it, are just in some ways, very privileged people.
So do you believe then that, or would you say that there is some sort of spirit that can take the lessons learned in this life into the following state of it being, whatever it may be?
Yeah, there seems to be, like, memory is a lot more profound than we normally define it to be. Like, ordinary consciousness has killed all these words, killed the life of them. But when you understand the true definitions of them, the truly absolute rational definitions of them, that are grounded upon that first presuppositionless, assertionless, ground of pure being, you can call it the Lord, you can call it Brahma, you can call it whatever, the immediate indeterminacy, the Tao. If your words and definitions springs off of that, then they are connected to the supercoherence of truth, and they fix all the fragmentation in the meanings, and they bring those words to life. They make sense together. The sense making starts to flow, so you're not scraping up against each other in these conflicts all the time, but you can actually agree upon things in a non-culty way. You can agree upon them because the definitions finally make sense, and you can critique them. So when you get into that, and you get it through your own autonomy, you start doing the work of the school that forms a memory of your identity that is at a soulful level. And that sort of carries with you beyond the contingent time-space reality of the essential, unessential of what we think is the point, right? So you can kind of carry that work with you, that metaphysical work, because you're aligning with technically God's being, science's being, the truth's being, the Tao. So that stuff transcends ordinary time and gets you into the presence, and that presence, or the presence, is what is the timeless time within the finite world that transcends it.
Okay, so if we're here in the world as sort of a school, and this has been made for us to work within and take lessons from into our next state of being, why is the school built? What is God, or the creator, or the demiurgos? What is it gaining from having a school that spirits are sent into and then recalled from? Like, what's the point of existence? Not in our individual existence, but as a sort of broad whole, or is just being, and that's what it does?
Well, as I said, it's just to know itself as being perfectly itself. That's why the experience on ayahuasca that I had of seeing the cat, the thing that I can take back from that memory, and I'll never forget it, is this mantra. It was like, the cat is perfectly being the cat. And there was something, like I say that right now in ordinary consciousness that we're in, and it sounds like, oh, it's a tautology, it's boring. It's like, oh, it's circular. The cat is the cat. Okay, who cares? The cat is the cat. But on this profounder kind of consciousness, you're mimicking the point of God doing it, which is just to know yourself as perfectly what you are. And the cat had chosen, in some sense, to be that form. And I was wrapped up in that because in some cosmic sense, you're all just one consciousness. But the fact that the cat was perfectly acting as the cat, not as perfect God, like God's nature, was a profoundly self-defining essence that was so refined and so aligned and so, like, it's like when you're doing a task and you know you nailed it. Like when you're playing basketball and you hit that 3-pointer and it just doesn't even touch the rim. It's like swoosh. You get that feeling, right? It's like, whoa, you're impressed by yourself in some way. Like you surprise yourself. And that's like a constant epiphanic process when you're in your higher ideal nature. It's constantly like that, which is why like Buddha and those guys are always like blown away by ordinary things. Right? The present moment doesn't have to be.
So you'd say existence is just sort of being trying to understand itself, essentially.
Well, that's exactly. And for the philosophers in the room, when you get to the proof of truth and you start from the true ground of everything, pure being, the Lord, the Tao, whatever you want to call it, Aristotle's 4 causes are inside of that starting point, all simultaneously. It is its own formal cause, it's its own material cause, it's its own efficient cause, and it's its own final cause. And your comment here pertains to the final cause, right? What is the point of pure being? The ground? The point is its own immanent telos. It's just to be what it is. And it develops itself at all points exactly its own telos. Like it's being exactly perfectly what it is, because at least in God's beingness, it is always perfectly what it is. We are the ones realizing that as an explicit process, not just an immanent process as an ontological, epistemological simultaneity. We actually we are separated enough to have an alternating experience of that telos, and that's why anything meaningful in our reality aligns with what are you. That's why authenticity is so important, especially in the postmodern world. There's something about being exactly who you are and finding out how to grow into yourself that's paradoxically already you, but already not yet you. And that's why not just the destination is important. That's why the journey is also important, is you're deepening the presence while you're experiencing it. Like that's the point, is to experience it while also trying to get to this progressive point. You do progress in this infinite refinement, but here's the thing of the Chizzy. You've already gotten to the end of the first shell of perfection. Everything you could possibly know, you already know in these high-level categories of logic, nature, spirit. There's nothing you can learn outside of those once you understand how powerful and encompassing and eternal they are. But you are always refining inwardly. So you're already complete. You've already done one shell of knowing everything. The goal, though, is not just to know that, it's to keep going inwards. So it's a paradoxical sense of progress. That makes sense when you understand how these categories move by inner contradiction.
And so final question for this hour would be this inner governance that you mentioned a number of times. Is that sort of within universal logic and this movement, would you say that's kind of your ethical system?
Yeah, that's so that's where the universal logic materializes itself in its first concrete shell of perfection on earth, which is not just a general movement. It is an actual state, a nation state, but it's not a particular one only. It's supposed to be worldwide. That's why we call it, the movement is New World Spirit, is because it is a universal. And the scary thing is, if we do not create this inner kind of governance, this inner world order, we're going to, by default, have spirit rise up and create a government anyway, because it's working by this deeper telos through the particulars, the individuals of contingent history. And we're getting that right now through a war. The billionaire class are rising up to compete on who's going to basically be the thing that transcends the United Nations, which is a volunteer sort of particularity. There's no real universal there. The Secretary General is like another particular that sort of mediates amongst these particulars. And Hegel critiqued Kant's League of Nations to say that will never work. The particulars will only work in particular ways and not transcend that particularity or preserve it in a universality. And he's not agreeing with Plato here and saying, oh, the republic needs to be, his republic was perfect, and you have these guardians that decide everything for everybody. He says, no, that violates that principle of freedom. All the individuals need to have this autonomy and this agency in the state. And he says all God thoughts, all truth, all genuine scientific notions have three elements in them: a universal side, a particular side, and an individual side. And that's how Aristotle was building his science. That's what the syllogism is. It preserves all three of those elements in their right order, just like logic, nature, spirit are actually the universal, particular, and individual. That's why it's a complete, absolute syllogism at the top of the system. So this is what the government has to be aligned with if it's not going to turn into a totalitarian one like we're getting by default through contingency. They're working it out through war. The dialectic will create a sublation or a transcendental moment of truth, but it'll be in this brutal way first where we might not survive. We're not in a perfect universe yet, right? We can just kill ourselves. We can just nullify ourselves like many species extinctions that have happened in the past. And we look like we're heading in that direction if we don't make a quantum leap in consciousness immediately. Like we're talking like this year for AI and within the next couple of years for the war, and CRISPR's already creating biological warfare weapons that could, the pandemic woke everybody up, power that. And then climate change will end us if we don't do something now in the next couple of decades. So this is where, and if we get too depressed, right, we could just give up and then just let this thing take over and stop fighting, which is one of the biggest threats of all. So the inner government is to align with the universal logic. All the departments, all the ministries, align with this non-fragmented way of organizing a government in a rational manner that preserves the individual, the particular, and universal, so that people trust the system and can work together in learning the
Oh,
tizzy, getting.
hello? Sorry, I thought I lost you for a second there.
We're at the top of the hour, so I thought I would.
Oh, so did you just stop talking? I thought
was I muted?
I thought I cut out. No, I thought you cut out. I lost your voice for a second there. But if you just stopped talking in the middle of a sentence, that would be why I thought that.
Oh, you did a little bit there, but you're back.
Okay. All right. Bizarre. Anyway, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah,
Are you back?
you lagged for a second there. That's all. It's just a little bizarre. Anyhow, that is the end of our second hour. So we will drop out for another 5-minute break, and then we'll be back with the final hour of Callipolis Radio's interview with Mark McCormack. Please stay tuned. Thank you all for listening, and we will be back in about 5 minutes. right, we are back for the final hour. Mark, you're still there, I assume?
Still kicking, yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the people know who you are, what you stand for, what your message is. So now this final hour is going to be, how they can get in contact with you, how they can support you, how they can go through the Chizzy process, should they so choose, and basically your plans for what you're doing to advance the movement, which I know there's some big ones in the works for the end of May. I don't know which part you'd like to begin with. If you want to tell people where to find you first, you could do it that way if they want to get in contact with you. Or you could begin with your plans for the... Well, as I did mention before you were on, Mark became known around campus for his hunger strikes. And I know we did mention at the end of the first hour, your very first hunger strike in the pursuit of unionization of Uber drivers. So... I know you're big on the hunger strikes, and do you want to tell us about the big one you have going on at the end of next month?
Absolutely. This section, I guess, of the interview is talking about how do we get the message out when it's so extreme.
Yes.
Especially when it involves hunger strikes. And, like I said in the last section, it looks naive. There's a strange paradoxical nature to what's going on here, where it looks too simple to change the world. But when you try to unpack how simple it is, it turns into a 3-hour conversation that's just beginning. So how can it be so simple, naive, yet explain so much and take so much space? And this is the difficulty in getting profound wisdom into ordinary consciousness in an impossibly short period of time. You have to transcend ordinary ways of marketing. And to give the audience a little bit of hope in what I'm saying here, because at this point there should... Something like 98 should be making fun of the messages, making fun of me and my history. Your crowd might be a little bit more advanced, so there probably might be somewhere between 4 to 8% might be taking this seriously. But usually in marketing, from my studies anyway, you have this guarantee that out of 100 people, 1 or 2% always say yes to something. And so it's always that 1 to 2% that performs that Margaret Mead, quote, the world is only ever changed by a small group of people that just grows and stays committed. So as an activist, the thing that I learned that is most valuable in getting this message out is just don't give up. That's it. Jay-Z said it, like everybody says, the only thing that makes you successful is you have a cool idea and then you just don't give up. Just stay relentless on it. Marketing statistics show that it takes on average 7 exposures of an idea to get into somebody's consciousness. And then for them to think profoundly about that takes even more. So you have to be willing to be made fun of, to experience the ridicule, all that kind of stuff in the initial stages, and then know that something will come after that will eventually get past what's called the Overton window, the range of acceptable norms that consciousness will accept at any one time. If you have an idea that's outside of the Overton window, you're going to guaranteed get negated and made fun of. So the way that we're going to get around this dynamic is through, yes, hunger strikes, and the next one's coming up here on May 23rd. Very serious, because you can try and intellectually communicate the message, like I've tried to do here in the last the two sections, but intellect only goes so far when most of humanity is in religious consciousness or in art consciousness, or abstract spiritual or philosophical consciousness, which philosophy is starting to get a little bit into the intellect, but most people are in the mode of intuition and feeling right now. They're closer to animal consciousness than into this higher intellectual kind. And the thing is, our species right now is the closest it has ever been to being literate, to being in this sort of higher form of logic that can even reach universal logic. Universal logic is simultaneously intuitive and discursive, discrete. So it's actually feeling and thinking simultaneously, which is why it can reach everybody. So what we're going to try and do is appeal to, yes, the intellect, but also appeal to our emotions and our feeling. Because human beings are social creatures. We have genetics that allowed us to be the apex predator currently on the planet. Not because we're smarter, or not because we're faster or stronger. Gorillas are stronger than us. It's because we have the real superpower of the inner world, which is culture and language. And that allowed us to cooperate and basically dominate every other species on the planet, to the point now of basically killing everything, including ourselves. So right now we're going to utilize that superpower of our species by allowing a signal to permeate the global consciousness that doesn't necessarily require high IQ or being a philosopher, really great questions like you were asking earlier. It's about trust. And that is that when other human beings see other human beings making self-sacrifice for them, right? It's like trust falling. It's like when you stand behind somebody and they have to trust that you're going to catch them, so they have to fall back. We have to do a lot of that because our species is doing the opposite, which is why we have these protectionist policies causing nations to basically curl up and fight each other. So we have to do these trust activities, and a hunger strike fulfills that. It is genius in a way, and this is why Gandhi used it. It's genius in a way because it tricks the dialectic into not only negating the other, but negating oneself to simulate as if somebody's negating you. So it satisfies that negative component of the dialectic that then negates its own self. So the negation of negation leads to a transcendental moment that we call sublation. And these words might not make sense to you because this is the universal logic and the cultural tools that have been missing for thousands of years and why we're destroying ourselves. So as you do the chizzy stuff and the logic, nature, spirit from before, deeper, you'll eventually learn the movement of the essence of wisdom itself, which is this sublation stuff I'm talking about. But before that happens, you have to trust the process. And so we're showing people that we're willing to make a sacrifice in this crisis, that we will put your life ahead of ours in a wise way. It's not blind love, it's a wise love. To do it effectively so that you know we're not going to leave you behind if you invest your spirit in us, like a cult would. Sacrifices its members and all this. A great leader, Simon Sinek says, eats last. And that's what we're trying to show, literally, with a hunger strike. We just don't eat until other people get to eat. And it also protects the movement in two ways. Yeah.
You said we. Is anyone else joining you on your mega hunger strike, or is it just going to be you?
Not to the death, so this is where this hunger strike is very serious, right? No, I've had people have hunger strikes with me for the previous 10 hunger strikes in solidarity. So they would do 3-day fast, 5-day fast. I had one guy with diabetes do 7 days. I'm like, you probably shouldn't do the hunger strike. And he did, and he didn't have any symptoms from his diabetes, which shocked him and me. I said, you better keep in contact with your doctor and keep doing your blood tests, man. Like, I have no genetic disorders. I'm lucky. I have a lot of body privilege. But yeah, I think that the hunger strikes can serve multiple purposes for multiple people, right? It's meditative. It gets you back in control of your nervous system. Our nervous systems have been hijacked by corporate interests. They've basically indoctrinated us into salivating like Pavlov's dog. And that's all these big corporations, right? And it's bad. We have an obesity crisis in North America. So be resisting your impulse to eat. A lot of eating is comfort eating because we're in such pain psychologically. If you resist that impulse, it causes your consciousness to refine. It starts working on the dialectic, and you start to develop your universal side that can overtake your carnal side in what defines or is the condition for eudaimonia, which of course was Aristotle's point to life, happiness, right? This deeper, substantial happiness and virtue. So it helps cultivate that side of us. The second thing a hunger strike does, it literally just purifies your body. It actually does just melt off the fat and the toxins, and it triggers something called autogenesis, I think it's called, where it won the Nobel Prize in medicine in 2016 because it literally cleans up all these cancer cells and all this junk from all the junk food we're eating. So that's another benefit of it. And then the third benefit, besides just being a great PR sort of stunt, is it protects the movement it protects the movement from accusations of not only cultism, but terrorism. So there's two ways that the hegemonic order always tries to suppress your word. When you try and spread the word and you start gaining power and do the marketing and all that, there's always two ways that the current power tries to stop you. Guaranteed, no matter what you do, it's outside the Overton window, guaranteed. So instead of avoiding it naively and thinking, oh, everybody's going to love us, oh, you know, they're going to try and stop you because they're going to see you as a threat at first because they don't understand you. If the current order understood universal logic, they'd be doing it. So the first thing that they usually do is they make you look dangerous and they call you terrorist. That's usually the first, even before the cult thing. They usually make you look like you're going to shoot somebody or Molotov cocktails, you're a violent revolution. And so that they use that to justify military force against you, and then they suppress you with the military. So the hunger strike protects you against that because it's very, very hard to twist a bunch of hunger strikers into a bunch of violent, crazy people. literally, the longer the hunger strike goes on, the more useless you become, the less you're going to be able to do violence, right?
I mean,
So it actually gets better over time.
I've heard many people call you insane, but I've never heard anyone call you a terrorist. So
Exactly, right? And so to tell you guys how powerful this is and how experienced I am in activism, I was able to stay in the heart of the University of Alberta campus, outside, for 4 weeks without the head of threat detection and the campus police and all that being able to remove me. And they tried every possible way to get me out of there. A lot of people don't realize how much work I had to do to stay in that little spot. They threatened me too. They said, if you get more people out there with you, we'll treat that as an event, and then we're going to kick you off of all these policies and whatever. So they intentionally isolated me so I would look crazy. But I had 300 conversations with people who were interested, and 37 of those signed up to know more, and 17 of those actually started a student group with me and jumped on the crazy train. But the crazy thing is that the train we're currently on and not doing hunger strikes.
I was gonna say, every time I would walk by you, you're always chatting with someone.
It was nonstop too. Like it was literally 10 hours of conversation every day while being hungry. And in some sense, it kind of distracts from the hunger, but it's tough. But you're right. I had a great audience, because a lot of these young kids know that their future, they're going to be inheriting this mess.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I told them. I said, you're absolutely right, but do you have a solution? They're like, no, that's what we're worried about. And I said, that's the thing that I'm here to tell you.
Just to get very clear dates out there for people, it is May 23rd. Am I correct about that?
Yeah. So
yes. May 23rd,
into,
you are blocking off a street in downtown Edmonton to begin a hunger strike outside of the courthouse, which will last until, what is it? Either everything is fixed or you die, if I am remembering correctly.
Yeah, it's extreme. Yeah, it's the final hunger strikes. There's only 2 left. I had planned out a year and a half worth of hunger strikes, because that's how long I thought we had before AI started to take over things. And I was right. It's actually happening. We might have AGI as of December. It just hasn't been released publicly. So the last 10 hunger strikes were on campus. They worked to protect me. You know, they couldn't get me off of campus. The Palestinians tried to copy me right after, and they got tear gassed and shot because they didn't do their homework. Right? They got crushed because they were made to look like terrorists. They said, oh, they have a screwdriver and they have like pallets, and they freaked out and said, oh, there's bad actors, and they got crushed because they weren't on hunger strikes. So that's what happens if you don't have a hunger strike and you don't go and do these protests in the wise way that I'm trying. And now the reason why I'm out at the courthouse doing the last hunger strikes here, the serious ones to the death, if no action is taken, I will stop them if they start doing this universal logic and the intergovernment and this new legal system that I learned at the courthouse. But the reason why it's at the legal center of at least our town here, our city, is because the hunger strikes provide one more level of protection that makes all the difference, and that's that it's a charter protected activity. So unlike a normal movement or a marathon or whatever, if you block off things, you don't get special protections. They can just dismantle you and say, okay, what are you doing here? But a peaceful protest is covered under Section 2C of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and you have special privileges under that. You can block off roads and public land. As long as you're not causing an imminent danger to others, you can do a lot of wild stuff as long as you're not seen as dangerous. That's what the hunger strikes solve. It's very hard to show that we're going to...
planning on being out there for aren't you going to be out there for 6 months or something though?
Yeah, so the thing is, because we know it's going to take a while for this message to permeate, we're making special conditions on these last 2, because I don't want to die right away. Like I'm trying to increase the chances of survival, but people are really lost right now, so we're going to have to buy a few more months. So I'm saying to people, you can buy, in a very simple sense, if you recognize this and you don't fully, if you recognize the power of this, but you're not fully convinced, you don't want to stick your neck out yet, you want to learn more, then you can take a small step and just help buy these vegan meals for me and anybody else on the hunger strike. But you can only buy one at a time, and you have to learn more about the universal logic in a special way, which I'll tell you about in a second. But these meals I will eat once or twice a day in the beginning, and it will only take 1 or 2 people per meal to buy them. It's just like a $20, whatever, $15 meal. But every meal that is eaten, the next meal gets harder to buy. It takes more people. So the first meal might take 1 person, and then the second meal might take 2 person, and the next one might take 4, and
I'm not sure if we'll go fully exponential because that only buys us like an extra month. I'm trying to make it so that if people are believing in this, we'll get up to somewhere between 3 to 6 months, which is enough time to start a movement. And the thing is, this little section of land that I'm blocking off in front of the courthouse is a major arterial roadway in our city, meaning that 10 to 30,000 cars per day will be disrupted, and 9 buses, city buses, will be disrupted. It'll be huge. So it will start to generate a lot of attention over three to 6 months, and that gives us a lot of time to train up people on the ground because it starts to feel real, and it's easier to start a movement that way.
Do you really not think like that you're going to be arrested for blocking off a major street in the downtown core of a million people city?
Now, if I was a naive activist, no, they wouldn't. But because I've been at that courthouse for 500 days, dealing with the sheriffs, they called the sheriffs on me the first couple of court appearances because I staged a protest in court, and now they don't call the sheriffs on me at all because they know me and they know that I'm not violent, I'm rational. So earning trust, just through experience, just them knowing you, goes a long way. So I proved myself in the courthouse, and now I've been working with the police directly. I actually invited how universal logic works is by sublation, not negation. Mm-hmm. Sublation is integrative. You integrate your opposite, your duality, into a concrete non-duality which absorbs it. So instead of negating the police and saying they're part of the problem, which they are, and they know that, we're saying, well, the real problem is the courthouse. If the courthouse is corrupt, people leave it knowing that their case should have won, and they don't believe in justice anymore, so they're disenfranchised, and they go out into society and do a bunch of bad stuff, because if they're not going to get justice, you might as well steal, you might as well do a bunch of this stuff, because it's happening to you, and there's no justice. So the police are the ones that have to deal with that, and basically babysit that. So the more corruption in the courthouse, the more mental stress it puts on the police, and there's already, they told me, a mental health crisis in the police force. Like, these guys are traumatized, PTSD, and that's why they take it out on the citizens, and it ends up as police brutality, because it seems endless. So instead of blaming the police, I asked them, well, what do you need? And they actually were the ones that said this to me. They gave us the slogan of the movement, at least the justice piece. They said, Mark, we don't have a justice system, we have a legal system, and they're not the same thing. So we're going to create a real justice system, because the alignment with the universal logic, the alignment with this sense of truth, is by default goodness. So all you have to do is know about it, and it starts to fix that fragmented consciousness, and you start acting in truth, and that creates goodness by default here and now. So there's a way we can redesign the justice system in this universal logical way, because all truth is like fractal like that. It just repeats in the same order. That's why once you memorize the first blueprint of it, it's so simple, it just repeats. That's why once you know the nature of it, you don't need to know the particulars, because it's true in all cases. So the police are invited into this, and they might end up protecting us, because I had a couple of sheriffs and officers come out on my previous hunger strikes out there, and they said, yes, we have a justice system, we have a legal system, not a justice system, but they actually did come out and say, Mark, we are sick and tired of what we're seeing in the courthouse. Like, they can't stand watching the injustices happen, and then some of the culture in there. And the lawyers themselves are also experiencing a mental health crisis. They know something is wrong, so we're all suffering. So when you frame the movement in that sublative, integrative way, that's not naive, wise love, not blind love, you get a lot of protection from your enemies that you normally wouldn't get. Like love thy enemy kind of stuff. So I'm actually meeting with the police, because I messaged the city and I was very open. I told them who I was, and all my protesting over the last 20 years was all peaceful. So they can't make me look like a terrorist, plus the hunger strike. They're more willing to work with me. So I'm actually meeting the Edmonton police outside the courthouse to start mapping out where we're going to put the pylons and start blocking off the traffic. And we might leave one of the bus lanes open to make it a little bit easier for the city to transition for the first month. And because I'm willing to work with them, they're willing to work with me. Not in a way where they absorb me and corrupt me in the movement, but in a way where we're sublating them and getting real work done.
So you've met with the police, and they're okay with this?
Oh yeah, the police were on my first 2 hunger strikes out there.
Okay.
They were checking on me every night, and they actually arrested me 10 times in my first one, which was illegal. So I might have to file
I was going to say they might arrest you again for when you close the street off.
Well, here you're right, and the city has already warned me, but this is how I'm going to get around it. I filed an injunction in what's called the Declaration of Relief to one of the head justices in the courthouse from the first hunger strikes, and it changed their behaviors because it clarified that they actually did violate my charter rights, and I was allowed to be there, and it wasn't trespassing.
And I had case law to show that as well. So that got the police it gave the police a reason not to bother me when citizens call me in. It was actually the citizens calling me in that forced them to act. And they said, Mark, they actually didn't give me any tickets either, which was why, they were like, no, like, we have to respond. So they're the fall guys for everything. So I said, okay, I understand that. They were way nicer. I got them the excuse that they needed to treat me right. So now when we block up the street, they have that precedent that they can point to the public and say, nope, these are charter rights. The judge said it's their charter rights, and we're not going to go against the judge. If you've got a problem, go to the judge. And the judge is the fall guy, which is what they're supposed to be. So now the police are happy with me, and we're going to be using that with the street. So I messaged them months ahead. I messaged them back in November, my other hunger strike. I told them we're going to start doing this. So they had a lot of lead up time. And now in the last 2 months, we said, here's our emergency response plan. Here's our site plan. We're starting to give them details on exactly how it's going to go down. And we're asking for the police to come and give us police cars to block up the traffic so that if a drunk driver comes, it's not going to plow into all the tents. They're still trying to put up a bit of a fuss because they're just covering their butts with liability. So they're just worried about the insurance, basically, if anybody gets hurt out there.
I mean, I
said,
you this,
okay,
I will be watching the news on May 23rd. That's going to be for sure.
Yeah, and the thing is, because we're doing it safe, and we're considering like the sanitation, all the stuff that I had to do in my previous organizing that I know causes problems. If you cross your T's and dot your I's, things go very smoothly. They go much better, and it calms down the people who are actually liable. So there's a big plan happening. I'm meeting them out there, mapping it out, and we're giving them an expansion plan too, like how we plan to expand once more and more people come. How we're going to block off, with their permission, the next city block. And then eventually circle around to Churchill Square and have these big speeches and start the movement that way. So that's the level of work. It's dozens and dozens and dozens, well, technically hundreds of hours of pre-planning that allows these very simple-looking events to happen in ways that look impossible for other people. So that's what you get when you get an experienced activist like me. We know how to do this correctly. If you try and copy me, like if you go out there and try and block off the street, you have a lot of people, you will get shot, you will get blasted, you will get hurt, you will get jail time, you will get a criminal record, you will get destroyed, the judges will not vote in your favor, the corruption will happen to you, then the police brutality will happen to you, and your life gets ruined. You lose your job, a whole bunch of crazy stuff happens to you. As we saw with the Palestinians who tried to come after me in the University of Alberta. This is a bigger deal. Like, for instance, the reason why we're doing it on the street and not on the sidewalk right in front of the courthouse is because there's a division of law. There's a division of legalities in terms of land.
I want to clarify something very quickly you just said for anyone who might misinterpret that. The Palestinians did not come after you. They did their protest after yours. Yeah.
Yes. No. Yeah. They're not coming after me. Attacking me.
I want to make that very clear.
Right. They in time they came after me. They started their hunger strike like a week or two after mine. So they came. Yeah. They came after me. So very wise.
I mean,
I love the Palestinians.
I assume the media will be citing this interview, I'm sure. So
yes. Well, they will be doing research on me. They already scouted all my social media. It's really intense.
I was going to say, have you spoken to the Edmonton Journal at all, or any of the local news stations?
They covered one of my first hunger strikes. Yes,
I believe. But wasn't that the campus newspaper that did that?
No, it was the Gateway, the campus newspaper covered it, and the Journal came out and took one picture. They didn't write anything about my story, which I'm disappointed in. But they did come out. And CTV did come out to one of my courthouse protests, but they didn't release the story, which I'm also disappointed in. But if we get more people vouching for this and saying, yeah, the guy sounds a bit crazy, but if you listen to him, there's actually a lot there. And then it'll start to open this crack of, wow, they're actually the sane ones. They're actually doing the right thing. And then the media stations will start to say, okay, we're not going to be promoting a crazy narrative. This has a lot of wisdom. They're very caring and compassionate. And then they feel like they're helping.
Well, I'm sure you were censored by the Clintons and the CIA and the shadow government that is opposing the universal logic.
And we love them too. They're trapped too. But yeah, when I did my first hunger strike, I actually had Canada's top anti-terrorist organization confront me at the airport. It's called INSET, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team. They literally came and introduced themselves in like undercover cop clothes. And I was like, what? I said, why are you guys introducing yourselves to me? Like, shouldn't you be undercover? So, yeah, they didn't give me a terrorist record, which is good. I FOIPed them and all this, but you're right. There is a lot of censor. There's a lot of pathologizing. There's a lot of mocking. That always happens, but I'm starting to get out from underneath it, and people are starting to realize that I'm just a really experienced activist trying to do what's impossible for other people in as thoughtful way as possible. So, and we got to love those people too. That's the thing. If you talk about the dark state as it's dark, it'll start to become darker. So that's why we have to use sublative language and saying, yeah, I just assume everybody around me is CIA, FBI, whatever. I just assume that, like, prepare for the worst, and you still love them anyway. You say, yeah, even if you're CIA, you're just trapped like the rest of us. Love you anyway. If you do something bad to me, it's probably a double bind. I'll do my best to speak the positive in you and then release you to the power of this universal logic. To see and to speak to the good in people helps them create it in themselves. If you look for the bad in people,
enemies.
Exactly, 110%. So that's really what the protest is it's a very wise and powerful launch point potentially for the actual marketing strategy that we think can work. And it's not going to be a whole bunch of media station stuff. It won't be a lot of social media stuff, because that stuff is external connection. And I've already tested it and went viral 2 or 3 times. And the algorithms just suppress you once you start getting big enough. So the only way to do this is by something called the meta modes and the flock strategy. And these sound like weird little words, right? They sound like weird words, but we chose them very specifically. So once you understand a bit here in the next half hour what the actual the reasoning is behind it, you'll understand that the current strategies that movements are using are actually the naive ones that have like a 99% chance of not succeeding. So this meta mode marketing strategy has to do with levels of consciousness. And Hegel and this universal logic maps out that there's 5 maturity stages that your consciousness, your mind has to go through before you can even think about universal logic or this deeper kind of pure wisdom. The lowest level is essential. It's where we all start. It's called artistic consciousness. But it doesn't just mean like, oh, you paint pictures and all this. It just means it's the mode of immediacy, where the universal logic comes through without you thinking it explicitly. It comes through the mode of being. It comes through intuition. So that's why children can do it. That's why interpretive dance, all that kind of stuff is representing the wakefulness of this deeper sense of things. But when you try and think it with ordinary consciousness, you taint it. You corrupt it. So that's why a lot of these artists, they don't try and think their art, they just be their art, and they just put on the canvas, or they dance it, they just do it very naturally. That's the first mode of how the universal logic comes into being through us. The second mode that we'll have to market to is religious consciousness. Religious consciousness is a little bit more refined, a little bit higher, even though we don't think of it that way. And it's because it's half art and half thought, half structure. But the structure and the art are mixed. They're not very clear. So it's very easy to mistake the essential for the unessential. And that's where you get a lot of oppression, colonialism, a lot of cultural domination. You get the finite being the important instead of the actual infinite. But it is a higher mode because it's starting to not just channel it purely, it's starting to grapple. You're starting to think about it, but it's kind of rough. But you got to go through it. The next stage of consciousness sublates those two. It rises above and enters a new kind of form. The form is correct. It's abstract philosophical form, or this kind of higher spirituality. It's right form, but wrong content. The content remains fragmented. At least in art and religion, you kind of get it all at once. It's like a spontaneous knowing. You got rapture, you got inspiration, and then communicating it is kind of the messy part. But you got the concrete whole there. When you get the form right, in philosophy, the content becomes more fragmented because now you're getting your thoughts in there. Now you're trying to grapple it straight on, like directly, and you're getting that fragmentedness of ordinary consciousness interfacing directly with that bridge back to pure being, or the pure world of universal logic. So in trying to hold on to them with your mind, you're distorting them, not like automatically, but it's starting to get somewhere. Then the next stage is science, and science is like the pure form starting to rebuild the content. That's why science seems to be growing or seems to be getting more true, is because it has this consistency to it that lasts over time. That objectivity coming into empirical science is actually the universal logic. They're getting fragments, enough of a fragment of universality to connect them together. So you get a connection or a little chain of universals that we call equations. And that's why we think mathematics is powerful, but universal logic is more powerful in that it gives math its own qualities. So the qualitative structure of math actually comes from pure quality, which is universal logic. So we started getting somewhere. That's why modern science is a little bit of a higher mode, but the content is really lost in a way. You gain sensuous power, but you lose wisdom, which is why we're developing technologies in the particular that's losing the universal wisdom, which is why AI can destroy us, why we're on the verge of nuclear war, why we can't seem to make connections with each other despite being hyper-connected on social media. All these paradoxes are happening because the universals in the wavefulness of the technology is missing, and we only have contingent logic, which is frayed and limited. So the next mode, like once you get that form and that fragmentedness sort of building, the next level, the highest form, the fifth mode of consciousness, is what we call genuine wisdom, or real philosophy, or absolute spirit. It's where you have pure form and pure content happening simultaneously as a super coherent whole in the right form of which your consciousness can grapple with directly. And then you can recognize it in all the other modes of consciousness. It's not like a separation. It's not like, oh, I'm wise now, screw art, screw religion. No, it actually causes you to deepen the appreciation of what people are doing in each of those modes, because you can recognize what is the essence of the universal logic in whatever the channeling is, whatever the religion is. You can see the beauty in it now. So a good genuine philosopher, an absolute spirit, goes back into art and becomes even more of an artist. It's even more beautiful. It deepens everything. It doesn't abstract from everything because it completes the circle. So the more that you do the modes, the deeper the universals become. The universals in their pure mode allows you to recognize them again in the art and then the religion. And then you learn more, and then you just keep doing that. And that circle isn't just a static going nowhere circle like you said before. It's like a spiral. It keeps going inwards. So there's a progress even though you're staying the same. That paradox makes sense now. So that's the marketing strategy that will work. Everybody in the world, all 8 billion of us, are in one of those 5 categories to different degrees and percentages. If you speak to somebody outside of their level of consciousness, they will not understand you. Guaranteed. The naivety is to think that you can convince somebody without using their language and meeting them where they are. So our strategy now is to not think that people are going to understand what I'm saying in this interview. This interview here, your audience is like high level, like meta mode 3. Maybe a couple of them are on the verge of meta mode number 5, the 5th stage of consciousness. But we're going hardcore here. We're talking about proofs. A lot of people aren't going to resonate with this. So your demographic, I'm hoping, will 1 to 2% will like pick this up and be like, wow, this has actually never been done before. But everybody else in art and religion are going to just hate this. They're going to be like, screw this. So we're not going to really use this content for them or this form. We're going to have to translate it. We're going to have to make many more of these types of meetings based on what level we think their consciousness is at. So the other thing too is just doing a broad blasting to those modes of consciousness, like a big PR campaign or advertisement, won't work either, because we need to make a quantum leap. And the only way to make that quantum leap is through trust. And so what will happen is, what we need to do is something called the flock strategy that complements the meta modes, the modes of consciousness. The flock strategy is named after meta mode number 2, the religious consciousness. Why did we pick one consciousness? Why not just do all of them equally? It's because we found out that there are statistics showing that 85% of humanity is still in religious consciousness. So if you don't get meta mode 2 under wraps, you're not going to get a global movement. There's never going to be critical mass. Definitely not within the time span that we have left. And the challenge is that a lot of people in religious consciousness are waiting for rapture in the end to come. So you can't scare them into action. They're like, yeah, it's fulfilling prophecy. Let it burn. But they don't understand that the universal logical interpretation of these divine texts is not to let it burn. It's to love and to let spirit come through you, and you're supposed to do the work, not wait for kingdom come and let somebody else do the work. Like Jesus, for example, died for your sins, but it doesn't mean you sit around and do nothing. You're supposed to spread the word, right? Buddha didn't go around and engage with the poor for 40 years for them to sit around and do nothing. Those guys did the dirty work. That's why their universals persisted timelessly through time. So the flock strategy is, yes, very animalistic, very arty, very sensuous, because it gets down to our herd nature, and birds of a feather flock together. And it also gets to these biblical sort of references too, where Jesus said, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his flock. And that sort of relates to the hunger strikes too, that we're doing this self-sacrifice that protects us in many, many ways on practical and spiritual and scientific levels and political levels. But the flock strategy, how it works, is basically MLM for spirit and the true notion of profit, which is actually flow states. And the flock meetings operate by personal connection. So you contact 28 people that you know and who trust you already. Trust is like 10 years worth of communication, right? It'll take you 10 years of general marketing and cold calling to build a connection that's strong. So the only way to make this quantum leap in information like this learning of universal logic, is to do Chizzy and to communicate the vision to people in their meta mode with people that already know them and trust them, and then meet them where they are and give them that attention, and to not reach outside of that 28 person limit, because we've calculated the numbers. You won't have time to communicate to people outside of that 28. Like 28 will also take some time, and only 37% of those need to get on board. We calculated the numbers, and if you can't convince your friends or family or whatever to get on this huge quantum leap, that's okay. You only need like 7 to 9 of them to actually say yes and start learning it. So we don't even need to have a huge success ratio. Like 37% is still pretty high, but it's manageably high. And that can create a movement that can go exponential within 28 days. So we think it's going to take somewhere between 4 to 6 months in terms of the time frames we have left. That's why I'm trying to line up this last hunger strike for that time frame. But the numbers all work out that if you just talk to one person per day, you can actually generate a huge movement without burning people out. So that's the flock strategy, getting people to get people on board like that in a very personal way, that they're allowed to question authority. It's very non-culty. They can question everything, even our root axioms, all of that. And you reach them in their language so they don't feel tricked or duped, and that they can understand what's going on and self-determine it for themselves. So with the meta modes plus the flock strategy is sort of how we've gotten past naive marketing, and we have a realistic chance of creating a global movement very, very quickly that will surprise people. Now the last problem is, what's the content of what we're communicating? Because it sounds pretty intense, right? No, there's no way of like watering this down. We're like saving the world. We're being the ultimate authority and claiming authority in all these meta modes, whether you're artistic maestro or you're messianic, religious person or Christian, or you're a sage in philosophy, or you're a luminary in science, or you're an absolute spirit claiming the truth as genuine wisdom. We're claiming authority in all those modes of consciousness. And it's really intense to try and get somebody to believe that if they don't know the universal logic and can prove it for themselves.
I was gonna say, don't you also have a bunch of Nobel Prizes to win? Okay,
yes. So this is where I'm getting at. So it's a big pill to swallow. It's not like we're selling puppy dogs here, right? And we're gonna have puppy dogs at the protest so we can keep it peaceful. The SPCA and all these dog and cat shelters we're gonna invite there.
Okay.
But yes, the way we're boiling it down is we're simplifying this vision down into 2 sentences, and it does have to do with like big feats. It have to be it'll look miraculous to people who don't understand the universal logic, because they won't understand the inner order or the wisdom that we're using to do all these things in a nonlinear way. So I'll start with the 2 sentences, and then we'll get into the Nobel Prizes, so that it makes a little bit of sense to you on why something so crazy sounding, so impossible, suddenly becomes, at least there's a chance. And it'll complement the hunger strikes. So everything that we're doing, the whole movement, can be communicated as universal logic, but to communicate all the pieces and how they fit together happens in 2 sentences. And the first sentence has to do with the anti-cult training. So we empower people right away. We say, we want you to question, we don't want you to get involved until you absolutely understand what you're getting yourself into. So the first sentence is called the empowerment sentence. We don't just tolerate you, we don't just tolerate the questions, we empower you, we give you real power as much as we can before you even get in to the culture. And the sentence is very short. It goes like this: New World Spirit meetings follow a sacred time using empowering people with the rights to flow using universal tools. So all of those words there probably don't make sense to anybody right now. They have to be unpacked. But if you want to explain it in a very simple, general sense, in like 10 seconds, that's it right there. The second sentence is, once you understand and you get used to those tools and we teach you what they are and you start using them and they start protecting you, from cults, including us, and it helps you recognize the cults you might already be in. Then you can figure out, okay, well, what are we empowered to do? What's the content of what we're here to do? And that's the second sentence. And it's very simple again. It goes, New World Spirit is an inner government with the ultimate goal of flow states for all using universal logic. So universal logic is in there, but it's the hardest piece. So that's what we put at the end. And so they say, well, what does all that mean? And then we unpack that in these very personal meetings, and we give time, and they're allowed to question every single word, because every single word is packed. But we can explain it in levels now. So we meet people in their language of their consciousness, their meta mode, right? And then in terms of the content of how we unpack that is dependent on how fast they can learn. So if they have high IQ, you can kind of bombard them and they'll pick it up and they'll get it. If they have average IQ or lower IQ, you take it in stages and you dance with them. And you translate things in the way that they need to based on your personal stories and all of this. And then that really increases the chances of flow state happening. And flow state is where you learn the most optimally because you experience timelessness, complete immersion, and intrinsic enjoyment, which increases your productivity by 700%, studies show. So that's how we will teach this to people in a way that's not overwhelming them, that doesn't use any of these cognitive biases. You want everything to be explicit. And it's simplified enough to have a starting point that everything is anchored into, but it can unpack to unfold a new Kelly-Post, I guess, worldwide, a global state that has a bunch of departments in trinities all the way down, aligned with universal logic, giving goods and services to feed people and get their basic Maslow needs met so they have the patience and the ability to think about universal logic and raise their consciousness through the meta modes, eventually to meta mode number 5, the highest form of consciousness, and then start embodying these empowerment principles and sharing them with their friends and family, which will start healing inner contradictions that is fragmenting their life because their consciousness has been fragmented from the traumatic culture we've all grown up in. And that's basically how we're going to market and get people on board in a wise way that's not naive, can have a hunger strike, peaceful protest that will have people believing that we can win 6 Nobel Prizes at the same time to get the hegemonic order to basically accreditate and vouch for us in a sort of judo flip of, instead of them negating us as we're rising up in power, they will be endorsing us. And that will speed up the process as well, because anybody who even gets 2 endorsements on 2 Nobel Prizes or two nominations will blow people's minds and be like, wow, there's got to be something here if system relevant people are vouching for these people who look like they're operating outside the system. So the universal logic is truly universal. It just repeats itself in anything that is true. So once you learn how to recognize the order, then you can see it in every domain of knowledge. So I already showed you the top level, logic, nature, spirit, is if there was a Nobel Logic Prize, that would win the Nobel Logic Prize. But the same order happens in physics, chemistry, medicine or biology, physiology, literature, and peace. So all you have to do is learn one pattern and then recognize what the symbols are in each of those domains, and it will reveal and highlight the inner contradiction that the current contemporary understanding is at. And we go in there and we say, you need to have a conceptual shift. And we do these very simple but profound foundational shifts. And then the experts in each of those domains will have all their mathematics shifted. All their approaches will shift. And they'll realize that it will solve the root contradictions that they're facing down the line. Mm-hmm. And that's Nobel Prize worthy. That's all that we're ever doing, is solving these contradictions. So that's why it's realistic and possible.
It's fair. So, in short, I think you have a number of good ideas. I think you have good intentions. I think you can be a bit verbose, and I think your words might put some people off and confuse some people. Is the impression I seem to get. Yeah, no, that's fair. And I mean, true. This is one geared maybe not to every single person on the planet, but my opinion on your movement with that you need to get some bit more simple messaging out there would be my advice.
And I appreciate that. And I'm going a little bit hardcore for your audience, because your name is, like, literally your stage name here is Saint Benedictus, which means that you're very well studied to have that. And the fact that the channel is named off of the ideal city of Plato, who a lot of people haven't even read. Like, if you know the Republic, that's okay. But the fact that you know the city really shows that you're sending out a signal, attracting an audience that has a very niche giftedness. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to see if there's one or two of them that if you water down the signal too much, those one or two hardcores won't resonate. They're like, I'm not going to give my time to this thing.
No,
It's
that's
not
fair.
hardcore enough.
But I feel
right?
like the simple
So if you
stuff
get
gets
them-
people in, and then you can give them the more complicated things should they so desire.
Yeah, that's part of it. It really works well with puppies, but this kind of thing is so hardcore. It's like, ooh. But you're
That's
right.
fair.
We are now working to branch out and get the flock strategy going, and your channel is a nice addition that will probably get a couple more people starting to build their flocks out, and surprising us with the cool people that they know.
Oh, well, I'd like to turn this last 10 minutes towards how can people directly interface with you about this hunger strike? How can they support your hunger strike? Where can they find you? How can they interact with you? How can they learn about the universal logic? How can they go through Chizzy? How do people take actionable steps towards fixing the poly crisis and the meta crisis and all the crises?
Okay, first thing is go read Hegel for yourself and read him directly. The more people that have their consciousness aligning with the immanent order, you can do it without us. If you think we're a cult, you can just do it without us. Just go read Hegel's Science of Logic directly. Don't read the Phenomenology of Spirit, because you need to understand the universal logic to understand how the words are moving. And you will notice that the reason why he starts with the Phenomenology of Spirit as an introduction is because he's performing that Socratic masterclass on you and twisting your words into their opposites, so that you get this ungrounding effect where it's like you think you know what you're talking about, but you actually don't know anything. Not even the basic words that you think you're using. So if you think you're eventually going to understand something there, you're not. You need to go to the Science of Logic once you have that painful experience, to the ego. You go down, it's very humbling, then you go down to the Science of Logic, learn the nature of the universals in themselves, and then when you go back to the phenomenology, you can recognize the universal movements in all the particular words. Okay, that's the secret sauce right there. Once you do that, with or without us, you can start to see the same thing that I'm seeing. The spirit, the truth, the science, the art, it'll start coming through you naturally, because it's fixing the traumas and the fragmentedness in your consciousness, and you'll start to generate the movement by yourself. Okay, but if you want to work with us more directly, what I would say is go to our website, newworldspirit.com, and then you fill out that form, and then we'll contact you through email. And I'll use my university email, so you know I'm a real person. You can track me down and look up my stuff on the internet if you'd like. And if you want my university email directly, it's mjm11@ualberta.ca. So there you go. Please don't spam it. Even if you do, they have my account so heavily locked down because I sent like 5,000 activist emails to all the professors on campus. It's hardcore. But it's still running. And if you want to set up a meeting, what will happen is we'll either invite you, either I'll meet with you, or if I get bombarded with a lot of things, then we'll invite you to these daily meetings we have called Ever Living Meetings. And these meetings are structured to protect you with the universal tools already. You start to learn, you start to be the change you want to see in the world immediately. So when you come to these meetings, we're using these tools, and it's very democratic, and you're given a chance to speak and critique and all of this. And it happens twice a day. Every 12 hours, we have like a development cycle. It's kind of like beta testing our tech really quickly. Every 12 hours, we create new ideas, we talk about what worked, what didn't work, and then we try and fix them for the next meeting. So they're at 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time at night, and 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time in the morning. So morning and evening, no matter what continent you're on, usually one of those meetings works for the global movement. And we have people in Nepal, and we have people in India, and we have people in the States, all over the place, wanting to learn more. So we'll probably invite you to one of those and get to know you. And then what will happen after that is we'll start, either you get put on my flock or somebody else's flock, and then we sort of like give you time and answer all your questions so you feel comfortable questioning us. And I like talking in this colloquial kind of weird way because it makes it easy for people to negate me and feel comfortable being like, this guy sounds like an idiot, this guy's whatever. It's a way to allow you to feel safe critiquing the immense amount of knowledge that we have behind the movement. And you'll notice there's a weird thing that you're going to notice with somebody like me or somebody else on the team here, is that at first it looks very simple to like, you know, undermine or find a contradiction in our position, or sort of like, aha, gotcha. But what you'll notice is that as time goes on, it gets harder and harder and harder to move us, because every position that we have is backed by something like 75,000 hours of activism. So you'll start to notice the real profound wisdom behind what initially looks simple, and you will absorb that that knowledge, so you can use it in your own life. And you'll notice that you'll be learning things that you didn't even realize you were learning. And that's why we want to empower you and slow things down so that you're aware of how much that this is changing your life potentially in ways you don't even know yet, because our consciousness isn't taught to be this aware. We're taught to be like slaves, basically. Go to work, go to your 9 to 5, do this, do that. But we want to teach people how to not just think in an indoctrinated sense, but to even question your own thinking. So that's where we're hoping to balance all these energies.
You are also on TikTok, I believe.
And yes, if you go, my hunger strikes are on TikTok, so you can watch my messages on there. And I tried to change up the meta modes that I was speaking to in each of the recordings, and kept them brief so that the attention spans could be held at least a little bit. But I do spend a lot of time on the religious meta mode because it's the biggest one, right? There's so many people in that meta mode, in that mode of consciousness. So that's really the strategy here, and we make it very easy to contact us, and I feel very blessed that you're giving me a chance to come into your community and kind of say something that's hardcore. Some people have done interviews with me and not released the interview because they realize how hardcore it really is.
Yeah, well,
But
I mean, we're live currently, and then this will be posted on the channel afterwards. So
you're a hero. Like, to me, the fact that you're even able to work at this level and hold all this intensity means that you have done a lot of work on yourself. Like, you're really somebody rare, and the fact that I met you at the University of Alberta in the philosophy department, which is totally lost, like you're in it too, right? They're sort of moving in the safe direction, but not necessarily the right direction for the massive change we need to make. So I felt like it was a real blessing, like following my intuition and be like, I need to talk to this guy, and I'm glad I did.
Well, thank you very much.
We are.
Likewise. Yes, well, that's how they can find you. So your big hunger strike will be on May 23rd, 97th Street in Edmonton, Alberta, if you don't see it here on the screen. That will be blocked off with gravel or cars or the police or something. We'll see how that goes. Keep an eye on the news for the New World Spirit taking over the world. And I mean, Mark.
No. That's a negative statement.
Sure.
Taking over is abstract.
I thought negating was good.
It was a part of it. You have to negate the negation, though. So just to be careful, we're sending out the positive. If you say we're taking over the world, you're going to get the CIA and the CSIS and FBI and everybody on your case. So
remember, if it doesn't work, Mark is going to use the Large Hadron Collider to change the world somehow. So
that's already happening. Yeah. So
oh, there you go. How did your to end on a personal note? How did your vegan dating event go?
As you know, yes, I'm vegan, and in some ways, the vegan community is rare in that they're usually very purified, like pure already in their habits, because going vegan is hard in this culture, and they're usually very activist and sort of angry enough to do something about it, so they don't want to do armchair activism, and they have this more universal understanding because they feel connected to animals and the environment in ways that normal consciousness doesn't. Like, anthropocentric consciousness has separated and abstracted us and negated us from the ecosystem of the planet, and we kill trillions of animals per year in just horrific ways that is actually sick. Like, it's making our bodies and our minds sick. So the dating event was run by AI, so it's getting everywhere, and the people in it were wonderful. The women were great. And the goal is to get that community, which is organizing, aware of the bigger problem and letting their amazing hardcoreness to New World Spirit or working with them. And then also meeting the Maslow's needs too. Like, there's a loneliness epidemic in North America. So getting all your needs met is part of what the movement does. We blend professional and personal so that as the mental health crisis deepens, you can come and just talk, like just get catharsis on like what's going on, so that you can be treated as a human being and also participate in this wisdom. So yes, if you need some vegan dating advice, you can come and we'll send you the links and get you hooked up too. So we're healing in all types of ways. Okay.
Yes, anyway, that was our mega interview about the mega crisis with Mark McCormack. Thank you all for tuning in to Callipolis Radio. I've been Ryland. This has been Mark. You can find him, as he said, on his website, newworldspirit.com. You can find him after May 23rd, possibly in jail, but most likely on 97th Street, blocking the road off. He's also on TikTok. Are you on TikTok under Mark McCormack, or is it New World Spirit? I believe it's New World Spirit, right?
Yeah, it's _ New World Spirit.
Yes.
And the thing is, I won't end up in jail because the way that we do activism, we're kind of forcing the police through declaratory release to tell us what they're going to do. So if they're going to say, if you do this, we're going to arrest you, then we'll go to the courthouse, file an injunction, and say it's violating our charter rights. If the judge agrees with us, then we can go to them and say, you got to change your opinion, and then they won't arrest us, and they'll do what we sort of want.
Fair.
That's how smart activism is done. So nope, nobody's going to jail. If you contact me, you will not. I'm probably the only activist in the world that you won't go to jail if you come and align your spirit with us. So
You heard it here. If you agree with Mark, you will never go to jail.
That's right, especially if you learn the universal logic and you speak with the power of that word. That's the real protection.
Okay, you're also on Facebook. I know you post some stuff there. So Facebook, TikTok, the website. I don't think you have an Instagram, do you?
No, it's not developed yet. We're learning to launch all that kind of stuff right now.
That's fair. Okay.
But it's not going to work anyway, right? Only the flock strategy is going to work.
True. So, well, in the meantime, you can follow Callipolis Radio on TikTok at Callipolis Radio. Handle is right there. Anyway, this has been Mark. I've been Callipolis Radio. Thank you all so much for tuning in. A big thank you to our channel members, Joshua Anolik Torts, Catherine McMillan, Dink Smallwood, Ronnie Limestone, and our newest channel member, Dapper Clown. Thank you all so much for supporting. If you'd like to either join our Discord or become a member of the channel, you can find more information linked in the description below. It's $5 a month. Once we hit a threshold, I will take all the ads off the channel, so go sign up. You're supporting an ad-free experience for everyone. But that has been me. Thank you all for tuning in to Festina Lente, which is our weekly show. I will be back here either Wednesday evening or Thursday day next week, depending on who our guest is and what our topic is. Probably Wednesday, but you never know. Might be Thursday. Anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in. We will see you around. Bye.